A very warm welcome to all of you to this one of its kind symposium titled Prithvi Darshana, Revitalizing Indigenous Epistemes for Sustainable Futures, organized by Women in Security, Conflict Management and Peace, an initiative of the Foundation for Universal Responsibility of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, in collaboration with the Global Partnership for the Prevention of Armed Conflict, the India International Center, and BML Munjal University. It is a pleasure to welcome such a distinguished gathering of scholars, practitioners, and students here. WISCOMP is a South Asian research and training initiative foregrounding women's leadership in peace and security and promoting cultures of pluralism and coexistence in the region. In 2023, WISCOM collaborated with the India International Center for a unique multilogue, integrating gender and climate change conversations. As part of the IIC Diamond Jubilee discussions on engendering the discourse, offering a distinct gender intentional and inclusionary lens for climate action. Building on these learnings, and as a member of the GPAC South Asia Network, the symposium turns the searchlight on the education system as a critical site of intervention. It is also a part of the Climate, Peace and Security project of GPAC, supported by the European Union, advancing locally climate sensitive peace building, which seeks to connect local, community based knowledge and practices with broader global conversations on climate, peace, and security. To take these conversations forward, may I invite Professor Krishna Menon, Professor of Gender Studies at Dr. B.R. Ambedkar University, Delhi, to introduce the concept and ideas that animate this symposium. An honorary visitor fellow at WISCOM.
Thank you, Shia. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to welcome you to Prithvi Darshana and to this beautiful space at the India International Center, which has long nurtured conversations that matter, conversations where we think across disciplines, across generations, and across the boundaries of the academy and the world beyond it. I begin by acknowledging WISCOM, whose work over decades has consistently expanded how we understand peace, not merely as the absence of conflict, but as a deeply gendered, dialogic, and transformative process. With GPAC, WISCOM's commitment to climate sensitive peace building is especially significant today when ecological crisis and conflict are increasingly intertwined. We've been reading about the toxic skies in Iran even as we meet here today. I would also like to acknowledge BML Munjal University and its School of Liberal Studies, whose engagement reminds us of the critical role universities must play, not only in producing knowledge, but in rethinking the very terms through which knowledge is produced. We look forward to hearing Professor Arindam Banerjee, Dean School of Liberal Studies, BML Munjal University, dwell on this collaboration that is being forged here today. What brings all these institutions together today is not simply a shared concern with climate change, but a shared recognition that climate change cannot be understood in isolation. It is entangled with questions of inequality, displacement, gendered vulnerabilities, and indeed with conflict and peace itself. This collaboration, then, is not incidental. It is exemplary of the kind of collective, dialogic, interdisciplinary work that is essential if we are to think and teach climate change differently. The concept of Prithvi Darshana invites us to pause and reflect on how we see the earth, not merely as a resource to be managed, but as a living, relational, and ethical field. The symposium asks us to move beyond what the concept note rightly calls the compartmentalized and technical frameworks through which climate change is often addressed in our universities. Instead, it urges us to reimagine our epistemological foundations. At the heart of this rethinking is a refusal of familiar binaries between the university and the field, policy and community, knowledge, expert knowledge, indigenous wisdom, so on and so forth. These binaries have not only structured academic knowledge, but have also limited our ability to respond meaningfully to the climate crisis. What might it mean, then, to take seriously the idea that knowledge is not only produced in texts and classrooms, but is also embedded in practices, in communities, and in ecologies? The beautiful exhibit alongside this symposium, Dhanya Vaividhya, thanks to Neeraj Kapoor, the celebration of indigenous seed diversity and soils, it reminds us that seeds are not merely agricultural inputs. They are archives of memory, resilience, and care. They embody generations of experimentation and stewardship, often carried forward by women and community elders. In foregrounding biodiversity, the exhibit also quietly but very powerfully reframes security, not as a quest for dominance and control, but as sustainability, diversity, and interdependence. In many ways, this exhibit is not supplementary to our discussions today, it is central. It makes tangible the argument that sustainable futures, must be rooted in indigenous epistemes and lived ecological wisdom. It also reminds us that pedagogy itself must become more tactile, relational, and attentive to the materiality of knowledge. The sessions we will engage with today take these concerns forward in different but interconnected ways. We begin with Rethinking Futures, Education, Climate Change, and Dialogic Possibilities, where Ruchira and Ranjana Das will bring sociological and historical perspectives to bear on the question of how climate change is experienced unevenly, particularly by marginalized communities, and how educational frameworks might either reproduce or challenge these inequalities. Their work reminds us that climate change is not only an environmental issue, but also a deeply social and historical one. Next, Anup will invite us to reflect on the university itself as a site of pedagogy, ethics, politics in times of crisis. His intervention is particularly important as it asks whether our institutions of higher learning are equipped to respond to the urgency of the climate crisis or whether they remain bound by technocratic and fragmented approaches. We will then hear from young researchers and practitioners, Dr. Bhavya Chitranshi, Ashutosh Kumar, Swarnima Kriti, Neeraj Kapoor, and Shashi Shikha. Voices that are not only future oriented, but also deeply present in the struggles and possibilities of our times. Their reflections on climate, peace, and education are crucial because any meaningful thinking on pedagogy must be intergenerational. Professor Shyam Menon, Vice Chancellor BML Munjal University, his observations here would be very significant considering his work in higher education has consistently challenged narrow, instrumental approaches to learning. His emphasis on interdisciplinary learning, inquiry led pedagogy, and curricula that connect knowledge to lived realities speaks directly to the concerns of Prithvi Darshana, reminding us that rethinking climate change must also mean rethinking the university itself. I hope I've learned this lesson rightly, Shyam, from you. I've heard you say this so many times. So thank you for that lesson. Dr. Meenakshi Gopinath, whose lifelong work in peace building and dialogue continues to inspire us, and her special interventions here will, I'm sure, help us think more expansively about the connections between climate, conflict, and the possibilities of transformation and peace. Let me conclude by returning to the central provocation of this symposium. If climate change is not merely an environmental crisis, but also a crisis of knowledge, then the task before us is not simply to add climate content to our curricula. It is to rethink how we know, how we teach, and how we relate to each other, to communities, and to the earth itself. This requires epistemic humility to recognize the limits of our existing frameworks. It requires dialogue across disciplines, across hierarchies, across generations. And it requires imagination to envision futures that are not extractive but sustaining, not exclusionary but just. The question before us then is not simply how we respond to climate change, but how we reconstitute the very terms of our response. What counts as knowledge? Whose voices matter? And which futures are made possible? It is in negotiating these questions that the work of climate justice and indeed of peace building itself will ultimately be shaped. Prithvi Darshana offers us a space to begin or perhaps to continue this work together. I look forward to the conversations that will unfold over the course of the morning, held together by the diligence, enthusiasm, and commitment of Shia Raina and Akashlina Chakrabarti, and the energetic staff of WISCOMP. Thank you and welcome once again.
Thank you, Professor Menon, for setting the context for today's symposium. Now, I would like to invite Professor Arindam Banerjee, Dean and Professor at the School of Liberal Studies, BML Munjal University, whose expertise and work in agrarian relations under neoliberalism has expanded the canvas of understanding climate change, to share his reflections.
Yeah, good morning, everybody, and thanks to WISCOMP for collaborating with BML Munjal University for something which promises holds many promises in terms of imagining the future. I'm particularly thankful to Krishna and Anup for coming together and making this collaboration possible between the School of Liberal Studies and at BML Munjal University and WISCOMP. This sustainable futures is something that is at the heart of public policy, which is something that the School of Liberal Studies is exploring currently, and we are launching a master's in public policy program. We have also launched a Center for Public Policy Governance. And when we started thinking about what should a public policy curriculum look like in today's world, we realized that the world today is passing through some kind of an interregnum in many senses. And at least one can speak of 5 different transitions that are very critical to what our future would be. 2 decades back, when the US housing boom collapsed and the world plunged into the global financial crisis, which led to a longer economic stagnation through which we are still living in many senses. We talked about triple crisis, like the food, fuel, and finance. And at that time, we realized that many of those crises, that triple crisis that we spoke about, is the seeds of those crises were sown in the successes of globalization and the Washington consensus that we became part of, the whole world became part of. And today we realize that the many transitions that we are facing today, the seeds of that was sown at the point when the crisis broke out. Just to kind of note some of these major transitions. The first, of course, the transition in the multilateral world order that we are currently experiencing. Ukraine, Gaza, and now the war in Iran has tells us that war is the world is a dangerous place now, and war is the new normal. And civilians, women, children can be bombed with impunity, even as many of our security institutions remain dysfunctional. The second very important transition that we see is, of course, the energy transition, and the whole force to move away from fossil fuels and the pushback to it leads to a very special conflict, which we are witnessing today, in terms of we want to perhaps extract the remaining oil before this phase of fossil fuel gets over. So there's a further push for fossil fuels, even as we realize that this is something that's not sustainable. The third, the technology transition, and this is also particularly important, not only because of the artificial intelligence, which of course remains at the center of this technological transition that we are seeing, which means that the way we produce and the way we consume and all of that, the way we live can undergo a significant change, but also in terms of the fact that in many of the critical technologies today in the world, almost 90% of them, China is ahead of the rest of the world, which also poses a new challenge to the old world order, and therefore many of the other transitions that we see is in some sense linked with the technological transitions. The fourth is what is at the heart of today's session: climate change and the ecological pressures. We are far closer to the tipping point of global warming than we were before, and this is something that is already felt by marginalized communities primarily, but also at the center of production in the world today. And to kind of the fifth and the last, I would say the last, there might be more transitions, but the fifth very important transition is what is also happening to our democracies. The turn towards populist authoritarianism is something that's also linked to many of these other transitions. And where is the battle for policy, where is the battle for our democratic institutions? It's also perhaps changed from the battle at the streets to the battle in the virtual world. Who dominates that world is something that also we need to understand to make sense of how we rebuild and deepen democracy. So in this context, when we were thinking of a public policy curriculum, we thought that it must address many of these different, very interdisciplinary challenges, and there must be, what Krishna you said, that deepening the dialogue between disciplines is something that's essentially necessary. And there were two things that we thought were very central to this process of thinking about a public policy curriculum. One, of course, is to reimagine the whole concept of public. World over, including our country, there is a battle over who is a citizen and who is not. There's a battle over what is legal and illegal immigration. But apart from that, there is also a reimagination of what does a citizen mean. Does a citizen essentially gets transformed into what we call today beneficiaries, where the question of rights, dignity, voice become secondary concerns, if not marginal. And that raises an important question that even in the old world order, did everybody get the same right? Particularly when we talk about marginalized communities, indigenous communities, a lot of the world has been built on the backs of unpaid labor of marginalized sections, indigenous population, women, and also the unpaid labor of nature, which we never counted, which is something that nature. So does nature also get a voice? Does nature get a dignity is an important question that we must address, particularly when we are imagining future, and public policy is not something that we imagine as, a set of regulations, a set of dictums that flow from the top. But policy itself, we reimagine as something that is people-centric, which addresses the concerns, aspirations, circumstances of the poorest communities of our societies. And therefore, particularly in this age of fast, rapid technological and ecological transitions, there is a possibility that the coping mechanisms and the innovations at the grassroots by communities actually also acquire a faster pace. So it's to connect with what you said earlier in terms of where does knowledge lie. And we realize that knowledge may not, and policy may not be the forte of experts in government and consulting firms, but it might actually lie also within communities from which we need to learn. And that is a dialogue that the School of Liberal Studies have also been engaged through our immersion curriculum in our undergraduate program. And that is something that we now want to take to the public policy program, which is to mobilize a whole range of public policy tools for grounded policy making from the bottom, being along with the concerns of ethics and empathy. So that is how we have imagined our public policy program, which talks about the concerns ranging from the economy, the society, the polity, but also to ecology, nature, technology, and science. And in that there are again different specializations that these future policymakers can professionalize into, but professionalize with the large or the central goal of reimagining the future. So I think I will end there and not stand any further between this very interesting set of speakers, particularly young researchers who would tell us how to imagine that future, in a participating dialogic manner. So all the best to WISCOMP and the young researchers for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Banerjee, for foregrounding the questions we hope to reflect on throughout today's conversations. We now move to our next segment titled Rethinking Futures Education for Climate Justice. It draws on a groundbreaking report towards climate education for all, authored by Dr. Ruchira Das, Senior Associate Professor at the Institute of Home Economics, and Dr. Ranjana Das, Associate Professor at the Department of History, Ramjas College. Their report hopes to offer a compelling case for embedding climate justice within education, from schools to university spaces. I now invite Dr. Ruchira Das and Dr. Ranjana Das to share their reflections.
Good morning. Am I audible? Yeah. So very good morning to all. Before I begin my presentation, I would like to thank Dr. Meenakshi Gopinath and Professor Krishna Menon for making us part of the event on this very significant theme. WISCOMP, GPAC, and BML Munjal University's collaborative effort to create this kind of a platform and initiate meaningful dialogues is so important in the times of climate vulnerability that we are living. So my presentation will be an attempt to locate the discourse of climate education through conceptual insights that will foreground why it is important to rethink education in the times of increasing climate vulnerability that we are experiencing, and what can be the possible ways to reimagine climate pedagogies for a just transition. These insights are also the anchoring points of our research that helped us contextualize the study that we conducted in different sites of the country to understand the state of climate education on the ground. This study was actually part of a project commissioned to us by Education International Asia Pacific. The field insights of the research Ranjana will discuss in her presentation. My presentation is divided in two parts. In the first part, I discuss Anthropocene as a concept and worldview. This is important because the term Anthropocene has come to dominate contemporary debates on climate change and the question of transformative action. I also discuss how Anthropocene is not a neutral scientific concept as often presented in the discussions on human impact on the planet. Rather, it is a deeply political and contested term. In the second part, I will be drawing upon Veena Das's insights to emphasize the significance of returning to the ordinary and the everyday to understand how climate vulnerability is lived. I begin with my first part. Anthropocene is a Anthropocene is a geological epoch in which human, that is the anthropos, and their interaction with the non-human, inanimate entities have become a decisive force in shaping the ebbs and flows of our times. Rising global temperatures, glacial retreat, sea level rise, ocean acidification, and hastening of species extinction are frequently cited as markers of this new epoch, leaving permanent scars on the earth. As both a scientific proposition and a broader worldview, the Anthropocene marks an epistemological break by challenging the modern belief in continuous linear progress, human control over nature through technology, and limitless economic growth, assumptions that have shaped Enlightenment thought and later the developmentalist narratives. Yet, the Anthropocene remains a deeply political and contested term. Its central problem lies in its universalizing conceptual framing of humans as a homogeneous category to analyze the ongoing environmental shifts that we are witnessing. The concern is that this uncritical usage of the term humans often clouds the underlying ideological, subjective, and culturally diverse struggles. It conceals the fact that environmental transformation has been driven disproportionately by a specific class of anthropos like the industrial nations, colonial powers, transnational corporations, and global elites, rather than by humans as such. Treating humans as a universalizing singular category depoliticizes responsible action and, most significantly, veils the structural inequalities embedded in these hegemonic regimes. Climate change within this discourse is perceived as the inevitable consequence of human action, shifting the attention from deeply unequal ecopolitical systems responsible for environmental degradation. Depoliticized reading of the Anthropocene pushes the racial, ethnic, gendered, and class dynamics of these transformations to the margins, also cast in the context of India. This framing blurs questions of responsibility, power, and historic injustice by presenting the anthropos as a single, unified subject rather than as unequal actors shaped by colonial and capitalist structures. Further, dominant Anthropocene narratives remain deeply Eurocentric. They rely on Western ontological and epistemological frameworks that continue to structure global environmental governance. Even as they critique modernization theory's promise of limitless growth, they often reproduce its universalizing logic by positioning Western scientific rationality as the primary lens through which planetary crisis is interpreted and managed. This raises a significant question: whose knowledge counts in narrating and responding to climate change? An appropriate response to the question would be a decolonial, pluriversal approach that recognizes multiple social realities structuring human non human relations rather than positing planetary crisis within a singular universalistic narrative. In fact, such an approach brings to the center subaltern, indigenous, marginalized, climate vulnerable communities whose lived experiences of ecological precarity precedes the conceptualization of Anthropocene as a geological epoch. These communities inhabit fragile socio-ecological systems and possesses contextual knowledge and sensibilities shaped by long histories of survival, adaptation, and resistance because of being differentially empowered, segmented, involuntarily enclaved, and subordinated by the dominant power structures. Decolonizing the Anthropocene, therefore, does not merely mean critiquing Eurocentric discourse, but foregrounding knowledge from below, knowledge of those who are at the front line, surviving the climate battle and negotiating fragile ecosystems. This critique has implications for climate education. Decentralizing climate discourse requires integrating decolonial pedagogies within education systems, particularly in the global south. Climate education must resonate with local contexts, foreground indigenous epistemologies, and recognize experiential knowledge of local native communities for whom the threat of ecological disruption is part of their everyday lived reality. Thus, to contest the Anthropocene is not to deny the material reality of planetary transformation. Rather, it is to insist that the term be critically examined. Such a move requires repoliticizing its narrative, decolonizing its knowledge framework, and recalibrating responsibility in ways attentive to power, history, and justice. Only through such critical engagement can climate discourse move beyond universal abstraction towards genuinely transformative socio-ecological futures. Climate governance, therefore, cannot be reduced to carbon accounting. It must confront the structural inequalities and historical processes that have produced and continue to intensify vulnerability. The critical question is, can we create a more democratic, transnational climate public sphere that can genuinely address questions of justice, responsibility, and shared ecological futures? Moving to the second part of my talk. In this section, the pressing question I want to begin with is how to bring forward the uneventful, uncelebrated ordinary lives and their everyday realities. The experience of loss is absorbed or rather diffused into the extraordinariness of events and constructs such as climate emergency, catastrophe, crisis, apocalypse, disaster, etc. Yet, the extraordinariness invoked by these constructs does not reside in the urgency of the spectacular. Rather, it lies in what unfolds repeatedly, undramatically, and uneventfully through routine struggles of survival as people or communities grapple to make sense of the distress induced by climate disruptions. Philosopher Stanley Cavell draws our attention to forms of destruction and violence that reside in small, recurring, and repetitive crises woven into everyday life itself. The extraordinariness of what is often accepted as ordinary or rather banal does not manifest its power over us until we become attentive to the ordinary within the extraordinary. Veena Das's idea of the descent into the ordinary offers a powerful lens to understand how climate change is lived. Climate disruption rarely arrives as a singular, overwhelming event. It does not always announce itself through catastrophe. More often, it settles quietly, almost imperceptibly, into the rhythms of everyday life. Learning, coping, negotiating to live with climate precarity is not the disappearance of the crisis. Rather, it makes its descent into the ordinary, an ongoing labor of making life possible under altered conditions. The extraordinariness of the crisis is made livable even as it remains deeply unsettling. However, an ambiguity exists. The ordinary is not merely a site of adjustment, it is also where crisis is invisibilized. Crisis absorbed into the routine ceases to demand urgency. The heat wave, therefore, is no longer an abnormality. It is simply this year's summer. The rising AQI is not an emergency, but a condition, while cyclones have become seasonal expectation. Ironically, the very processes that enable survival also contributes to normalization. Further, Veena Das's insights help us see that this ordinary is not neutral. It is dense with histories of disposition, layered anxieties, and continuous adaptations of those at the front lines of climate crisis. Life, particularly off and at the margins, unfold responding to climate change not through grand interventions but through ethics of the ordinary, where life is sustained amidst vulnerability and the ongoing damage. In her book, Textures of the Ordinary, Veena Das mentions how regimes that have carelessly or willfully destroyed places of habitation through its actions and practices, forests for instance, often move on with little regard for what has been destroyed, whereas those living the devastation, gathering the rubble, salvaging what remains, and slowly rebuilding offer a very different understanding of destruction. It is in these facts that both the extent of damage and the labor of beginning become visible. The sensibility of despair and repair finds expression in the ethics of the ordinary, particularly in the ordinary of those who are climate vulnerable. However, the crisis embedded within the ordinary that acknowledges the vulnerability of forms of life are somehow not in consonance with the national narratives of climate change and its education brought in through policy discussions, curriculum frameworks, and textbooks. Undoubtedly, over the years, there is a sincere effort to make the policies, curriculum, and school textbook climate conscious. Implementation of climate change policies in India are anchored on a co-benefits framework focusing on leveraging the synergies between development and climate action outcomes with an aim to move towards climate resilient developmental pathways for ecological sustainability. The NEP 2020 emphasizes the interconnectedness of humans and nature, promoting critical thinking and participatory multidisciplinary learning on issues related to climate justice. It advocates a bottom-up approach that links local environmental concerns with global challenges while empowering teachers as key agents of transformation. The policy also recognizes using native languages, folktales, and local practices to make environmental education relatable and action-oriented. For instance, middle school science textbooks of NCERT have pictorial excerpts on tribal sacred groves and how it contributes to biodiversity, and therefore the need to protect and preserve such groves. Indigenous practices like Van Bhojan are mentioned in the text in the context of caring and respecting forests. The other excerpt that we see is on the indigenous ecological movements raised in response to deforestation, particularly the critical role that indigenous women have played in such resistant movements. NCF 2005, again with its progressive and constructivist vision, promotes a pedagogy that is grounded in the ethos of environmental justice, bringing textual knowledge closer to children's lived realities, an approach that questions the sanctity of the epistemic status of the textbooks influenced by colonialism. Further, the recently framed NCF 2023 explicitly connects climate change and environmental conservation to value and ethics, with an intent to create compassion-driven action to generate environmentally sustainable practices. Now, the question that we often ask is whether national discourses are aligned with the ground realities or not, because we see a vision practice gap. However, what we miss out thinking is how are these very realities constituted in the first place within the textures of the ordinary, that is, through everyday practices, quiet forms of endurance, and the silent negotiations that sustain life amidst the ongoing climate trauma. Oral traditions, everyday practices of care for the environment, and marginalized experiences of climate vulnerability struggle to find legitimacy within formal schooling, and even if they find space in the formal knowledge, the voice representation binary remains. Even if native, local, indigenous traditions are part of the curriculum and textbooks, it is the teacher who has the legitimate authority to communicate, interpret, and validate the knowledge. For example, a tribal child's response to the teacher discussing role of indigenous traditions and practices in mitigating climate change is approved or disapproved by the teacher, as she is expected to represent authorized version of knowledge which the school is responsible for disseminating. The teacher's epistemic bias places the child in a situation where the child acknowledges ignorance for her own lived knowledge. So it is the teacher who is ultimately shaping the meaning of a text and of the knowledge it contains. Therefore, what appears as promising intent of the policies and curriculum frameworks often thins out as it descends into classrooms. Yet, from the standpoint of the ethics of the ordinary, the idea is not just to identify the gaps in practice, but to also capture the quiet labor through which life is sustained despite these gaps. Children adapting to climate disruptions to sustain their schooling. Teachers navigating the infused climate content across subjects in the syllabus despite lack of training, resources, and staff shortages. The community drawing on inherited native ecological practices to withstand climate calamities. These are sites where climate education and action are already unfolding, albeit outside formal recognition. In the ordinary, ethics is not located in policy frameworks, but in small, persistent acts of adjustment, care, survival that can only be understood as quiet forms of resistance to the conditions that make such acts necessary. National climate discourses inform about indigenous ethnic native traditions, yet they are disengaged from the textures of the ordinary. This being the reason why resilient stories of communities at the front line of climate crisis are rarely part of the formal climate knowledge. Climate margins normalize the trauma to cope and continually rebuild their disrupted lives as a collective. This knowledge remains unseen and unacknowledged in the formal discourse. Therefore, the question that we need to ask is, how are the national discourses and public narratives responding, or rather failing to respond, to the ordinary worlds in which people continuously remake life under conditions of climate precarity? It is the ordinariness of everyday life that reveals how realities are not merely represented or obscured, but are differentially recognized, lived, and negotiated in the everydayness, because in the fabric of ordinary existence, ethical and political are not separate, they're deeply entangled. The textured ordinariness, which is original, authentic, and real, is something the overarching universalizing policies and curriculum frameworks fail to capture and acknowledge. This disjuncture between what is lived and what is learned, French thinker Bernard Stiegler understand it as tendential loss of savoir-faire or generalized proletarization, that is, loss in the capacity to think and create knowledge, as production of knowledge is reduced to sheer consumption of facts whose meaning is hollowed out. Creativity gives way to compliance, as learners are expected to receive and reproduce knowledge that arrives already given, processed, interpreted, and complete. There is little room to dwell on it, to question, engage, or connect it with textures of their everyday life. In this sense, knowledge ceases to be something one actively constructs, instead something one passively consumes. Hence, what is required are significant shifts in how climate pedagogies are imagined and practiced. Climate education must move from rhetorical discourses to lived worlds, from universal frameworks to contextual experiences, and from the policy abstractions to the fragile, ongoing work of sustaining life in the ordinary, particularly of those at the margins. Only then epistemic transformations can happen through meaningful engagement, taking cognizance of the contextual complexities, inequalities, and contestations that define climate realities on the ground. I will stop here. Ranjana will now talk about the insights that emerged from our field engagement. Thank you. check it once. Yeah, thank you so much. Am I audible? Just checking the mic, yeah. Thank you, Ruchira, for your part of the presentation. I also take this opportunity to thank WISCOMP, GPAC, India International Center, and BM Munjal University for inviting us to present our recent work on climate education at this platform for critical discussions. I wish to thank Dr. Krishna Menon and Dr. Meenakshi Gopinath for extending this opportunity to us. Ruchira has already foregrounded the purpose of undertaking this research in times of turbulent climate change phenomena that has indeed become a planetary crisis. And as she said, I would be focusing on the ethnographic part of the study that was undertaken in 3 areas of diverse geographical. Just begin with education, yeah. No, that's all right. I think I can manage. In the 3 areas of diverse geographical, social, ecological contexts, and therefore experiencing divergent climatic impacts. These areas are Sundarbans in West Bengal in the eastern India, Gadchiroli in Vidarbha region of Maharashtra in the west, and the metropolitan Delhi NCR up north. Here we interacted with the key stakeholders in school education, students, teachers of middle and high schools, both government and private school administrators, and parents and local community members through methods of participant observation, focus group discussions, semi-structured interviews, and informal conversations. It may be mentioned here that this project was a 1-year project that was commissioned by Education International Asia Pacific region and is only an initial research into the realm of climate education in India that we intend to take up in a more expansive way later on. As part of my presentation, I have mostly focused on the interactions that took place in and around schools on issues of climate education, quoting some of the important verbatims that emerged during conversations. And I will leave the reflections and analysis of these research findings for discussions in the interactive section later. That's the cartographic, position of Sundarbans. It's in West Bengal and also sharing a boundary with the neighboring country of Bangladesh. Sundarbans, as we know, is arguably the world's largest mangrove forest and delta of approximately 10,000 square kilometers that is located in the southeastern part of the state of West Bengal and shares an international boundary with the adjacent country of Bangladesh. It has a dynamic ecosystem that offers a natural barrier to climate catastrophes, but also makes the region increasingly vulnerable to climate threats caused by rising sea levels, salinity intrusions, cyclones, etc., impacting lives of these socially marginalized communities who live there predominantly of the scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, and religious minorities. What do these climate-induced disasters do to the people there? They cause frequent population displacement, they generate food insecurity, and they deepen poverty, making the region a climate refugee hotspot. Given this emergent ecological context, climate change education therefore becomes extremely relevant here to foster early awareness, disaster preparedness, and resilience in the younger generation. In the Sundarbans, we focused on 4 villages. Those are pictures taken during the field work. These 4 villages that we focused are Chunakhali, Bashunti, Goshaba, and Hingolganj. These villages are predominantly rural agricultural, practicing paddy cultivation and fish farming, with additional sources of income from tourism of differential scales. Hingolganj is economically more developed with better agricultural production and more developed local tourism. Chunakhali, Bashunti, and Goshaba have their respective challenges to navigate through everyday poverty and due to recurrent natural vagaries are often forced to migrate out in search of better livelihood opportunities. So these 3 areas are much less developed and Hingolganj is comparatively a little bit more better developed because of its agriculture production and local tourism. The government primary school and the senior secondary school that we was part of a study in the village of Chunakhali has extremely poor teacher-student ratio and high dropout rates due to extreme poverty in the region as the children start working early to corroborate family income and girls are married off quite early. Hence, CCE in this context is certainly not prioritized. And when addressed, it often fails to connect lived climate realities with scientific classroom instruction. To quote a verbatim from a student, Schools only teach from books that have sections on climate change, but nothing on Sundarbans. Books don't teach us what is necessary for living, and most importantly, how to survive the calamities that hit us so often. A similar situation exists in Bashunti. Goshaba, however, presents a unique set of challenges for school education, as accessibility here becomes a major barrier, with students from surrounding areas having to change boats twice. So that's a picture in the earlier one where that's the river, and you have to constantly change boats, around 2 boats for young children to reach the only high school of the region that is severely understaffed and is, of course, overcrowded with students. During cyclones, it becomes an additional difficulty as sources of connectivity get severely impacted and does not get repaired for months. Apart from this, there is also the issue of lack of basic necessities, particularly drinking water in Goshaba further hampers learning, as education often takes a backseat to daily survival needs. This is in fact a direct impact of climate change, as stronger cyclones such as Amphan in 2020 and Yas in 2021 destroyed freshwater sources in the region. Climate-related activities or field visits are virtually absent in schools, and there is a disconnect between classroom teachings and lived experiences. During an interaction with the local community members, the members spoke of significant community intervention post any calamity. So they essentially don't wait for the government, to provide them with help, which is anyways quite delayed. So there, the community focuses that, they undertake collective action to fix broken river embankments using local materials like bamboo, tree barks, which they find are more sustainable in nature. A member said that schools can support the community in the damage repairing works. This can give children lived experience of how to cope with calamity-driven impacts. So this can also become a localized disaster management programs, but mostly schools are dismissive of such ideas. At another instance, an elderly woman from the Indigeneous Bhumij community expressed her concern about the rising disconnect amongst the younger generation between school education and their lived realities. She says, "We are the people of nature. Today's children are completely detached from it. This is painful. School's role is to sensitize children. But where is this happening?" Hingolkonj, our fourth area in Sundarbans, however, like I said in the beginning, is economically more developed than the other 3 areas, and hence seems more aware of regular environmental hazards that the region experiences, and therefore the needs of conservation. So there is a connect between the economic condition and more environmental consciousness as well. Much owing to the campaigns done by the local NGOs that have installed rainwater harvesting and solar panels in some schools and do regular demonstrations with the community. Those are pictures from the Hingolganj High School, where the NGO, the first picture is that of solar panels installed and the environmental awareness campaigns in the school. Although the local panchayat does not seem much concerned, despite Hingolganj being deeply impacted by natural disasters. However, schools here have more favorable teacher-student ratio compared to the other areas, and there have been visible efforts to promote CCE through student-led initiatives like tree planting drives, community outreach programs that are also made part of their evaluation work. So interestingly, the teachers also make it part of evaluation work to sort of include it as part of their study programs. As one of the teachers said, simply reading out materials to the students won't help much, but we need to include their lived experiences in the class to help them connect to the topics. However, teachers also highlighted simultaneously the lack of specific training programs focused on climate change that would be pedagogically helpful for them. Discussions with village members showed a specific resilience that could only have been developed through community cooperation while confronting climate change-related challenges. As one of the senior members of the community who has survived many natural disasters said, to quote him, "We have faced several cyclones. It's part of our lives now. People who are not from Sundarbans might think what a precarious life we are leading. But we do not share such a sentiment. Our strength lies in our collective consciousness to protect our land." This facet of community resilience is also an emblem of Sundarbans' identity, which should be reflected in the local CCE or climate change curriculum to teach climate change more effectively. Next, we move on to our next, field, which is Gadchiroli. Gadchiroli is a densely forested region located in the Vidarbha region of Maharashtra, interiors of Maharashtra, in the Western India, that is home to the particularly vulnerable tribal groups. So it's a very deeply, densely forested area and lived by many tribal communities. Communities here are connected to nature. Forests are integral to their lives and livelihoods. Therefore, the ecological and social context makes Gadchiroli highly vulnerable to climate change impacts. There are three schools were actually studied in the three blocks here. One was a tribal ashram school in Dhanora. The second was a government school in Vatsa. And the third was a private school in Khurkeda. The Dhanora block is a densely forested region of Gadchiroli, has a significant tribal population whose livelihoods revolve around paddy cultivation, complemented by collection of tendu leaves and mahua to supplement their income. At the tribal ashram school in Karwafa in Dhanora, where we've done our work, students shared that while the Maharashtra state curriculum includes topics like natural resources, ecosystems, and disaster management, community knowledge finds no space in the class. Though initiatives like tree plantation drives and Van Bhojan, which Ruchira talked about, forest community meals and worship are observed, the curriculum fails to represent the deep cultural ties that tribal communities share with nature, such as their reverence for totems and forest conservation practices. As a teacher said, teacher from the local tribal community background teaching in the tribal ashram school, to quote him, he said, displacement caused by activities like mining has drastically altered the traditional ways of life of the tribes and their relationship with the environment. Outsiders will not bother to preserve our traditions. Hence, as teachers from tribal communities, it is our own responsibility to ensure that the posterity does not lose its culture. This disconnect between lived experience and textbook content limits the relevance of CCE for these students. In Vatsa, at the government school in the Kondhala village, the students shared that while there isn't any specific focus on climate change as such, themes related to the environment are spread infused across various disciplines. To promote environmental consciousness, the school organizes programs like One Student, One Tree to celebrate specific days like Earth Day. However, students informed that indigenous knowledge does not feature much in classroom teaching learning, one of the reasons being that this was not a tribal dominant region and the teachers were not from tribal backgrounds, and therefore they did not consider it relevant to teach indigenous knowledge to discuss climate change. The principal of the school shared that, like any other government school, they too lacked in sufficient teachers who are otherwise overburdened with multiple administrative tasks, and hence it is always a struggle to complete the syllabus. Therefore, sections on environment are never given their due importance. As part of the community interactions, parents and village members expressed their concerns about the extreme heat in the region and acts of deforestation. They also underlined on developing a moral consciousness amongst their children towards conserving their forests and natural resources. For this, they emphasized on the collaborative initiative of the local government, of the community, and the schools. So a collaboration can only be perhaps the way out. Khurkeda, are the last area, and Gadchiroli is the most developed of the three blocks under study. Here we studied the private school where students shared that their curriculum included models on ecosystem, natural resources, and living world, and that the teachers actively discussed climate-related themes in class. But again, local indigenous knowledge does not feature. However, the students expressed a strong sense of affinity and responsibility towards their surrounding environment and even expressed their willingness to mobilize the community and also attend Gram Sabha meetings to voice their concerns. Teachers voiced the need to mainstream climate education in schools. Teachers informed that since they belong to a forest region, they obviously discuss deforestation in class, but they require manuals from government that would help them develop relevant pedagogical tools to teach climate change. Also, teachers were of the opinion that aspects of climate change, when infused across various disciplines, that's one of the approaches which is there for environmental education, to infuse it through various disciplines, according to them, eventually leads to the aspect of climate change, getting diluted by the hegemony of the core disciplines of the core domains of the discipline. In that case, it raises doubts on the infusion approach as a pedagogical method to teach climate change through various disciplines. I come to my last case study, which will not take a while. I'll just quickly flip through because the other two is something that we wanted to focus on. The last is, of course, the Delhi NCR, and we're living in Delhi and we're grappling with the impact of environmental disasters and climate change in our everyday life, with rising temperatures and extreme precipitation. That is further straining our existing challenges of water supply, sanitation, and air pollution issues. The city is also marked by stark socioeconomic inequalities, which amplify the vulnerability of those areas. So, the fact that there is a social disparity in the city between the better off regions and the marginalized regions, that also adds on to the problem. The climate change agenda for Delhi 2009-2012, with a focus on mitigation and adaptation ventures and the state level action plan towards adaptation measures, are yet to manifest. On execution of CCE in schools, students from government schools in Delhi shared that events like World Environment Day, Earth Day, and Water Day are observed through eco club activities, which they generally enjoy. However, some felt that these initiatives are more about fulfilling official mandates than actually fostering genuine environmental consciousness. To quote a student, very interestingly, he said that we participate in events to be environment sensitive, but we do not realize how much paper we are wasting in the process. Teacher respondents across government schools are of the belief that the ground reality is far removed from the aspiration policy frameworks. One of the teachers of a government school located on the banks of Yamuna says that even though our school is situated on the banks of River Yamuna, we hardly have an opportunity to go there for a visit, reason being no safety mechanisms in place and because we have no time to take them. As against that, in private schools, we see CCE is approached through the use of technology and multimedia tools in ICT-enabled classrooms. Despite access to better facilities, scientific equipment, teaching resources, many private school teachers still feel ill-equipped to teach climate change education due to lack of formal training. While the importance of climate education is well acknowledged, there is continued practice to prioritize traditional scholastic subjects, viewing CCE as secondary rather than essential. We come to our conclusive remarks. This ethnographic exploration of the three divergent and climate vulnerable areas in India seeks to explore the diverse challenges of practicing CCE in different parts of the country. The requirement for CCE to be more flexible and more inclusive in nature to be more meaningful. Qualitative ethnographic engagements with various stakeholders in school and adjoining community members helps understand the gaps and disconnect between policy vision and the implementation in schools. And finally, a distinct understanding of the ground realities helps formulate resolutions that are more meaningful, connected, and sustainable. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Ruchira Das and Dr. Ranjana Das, for such an insightful presentation and for highlighting the importance of integrating climate justice within education systems. Your reflections on bridging classroom learning with lived realities offer an important direction. Climate justice in education leads us to questions of researching climate change, engaging with the often complex intersections of the ethical, the aesthetic, and the political. May I invite Professor Anup Dhar, Professor at the School of Liberal Studies, BML Munjal University, to initiate the session and set the context. He will then take this forward into the next segment titled Young Voices Reflections on Climate Change. This segment will unfold in two rounds. In the first round, we will hear brief introductions from our young scholars and practitioners, where they will share their work, experiences, and key reflections. This will be followed by a second round, where they will build on these reflections and engage more deeply with their work. This segment will offer different ways to understand, engage with, and rethink climate pedagogies.
You can hear me, right? I would have really wanted a discussion on your presentation, Dr. Ruchira and Dr. Anjana. Actually, it was such a moving presentation and an important one. But let us see how we can connect to what you shared with us. It was very important, I thought. Very quickly, I'll just set up the context for the discussion we'll be doing today. I will not be speaking. I want my young friends to speak, who also over the years have become my teachers, actually. I have learned a lot from them. They have changed me, they have transformed me, I must admit, actually, over these many years since 2011. They have constantly helped in my self-transformation more. So they are my teachers. Just quickly, the the setting of this conversation with the five of them. What are we trying to do? I'll build on what you said actually, that what Arindam was also suggesting, that it is one thing to have a bird's eye view of the world, and it is another thing to have a earthworm's view of the world. The earthworm's view means mud on your body, actually, mud on your soul. But what's wrong with mud? Um, so, in the MPhil development practice program, and we have written a short, I would say, introductory note on the program. Professor Menon and I'll keep the book outside during the lunch break. You can take a look at it. The idea was that the students come to the MPhil program without a research question. Anybody who came with a research question, we tended to reject them. We encouraged candidates, applicants to come without a research question so that they could immerse in the textures of the ordinary. Let me borrow that phrase from you and Vinadas, that they immerse in the textures of the ordinary without an a priori kind of extractive and appropriative mindset. So we only accepted applicants who came without a research question. And two of them are here and three of them are there. They were in immersion. Arindam and Professor Menon and Krishna knows this so well. They were in immersion for 1 year in a rural household. How did it help us? The good thing about it was that we did not offer standard paradigmatic or hegemonic developmental solutions to the community. The community raised questions, the community troubled us, we were in crisis, our relationship was in crisis, sometimes our relationships were beautiful. And the community threw up questions. I would call them concerns more than questions. And how could we respond to those concerns? And that led to sometimes co-researching of those concerns. And then from co-researching, we move to co-transformation. So this is the journey quickly, actually. No question, 1 year immersion, co-researching, making connections between theory and practice. And because we were with the community in immersion, the community threw up questions at us. The community birthed co-researching areas, concerns, crisis, and that led to co-transformation. Okay, we will hear 5 small stories of co-transformation today and how they arrived at it. So this is it. Because we were with the community, we got pushed to climate, we got pushed to cultivation practices, we got pushed to gender, we also got pushed to seeds, as Krishna pointed out. Seeds as seeds of life, as she shared. We also got pushed, and Swarnima will take it up, to early childhood education. Of course, CCE, but ECE as well. Early childhood education as seeds of livable futures. That ultimately we landed that after all, it will have to be about education. University education took us, Professor Menon, to early childhood education very, very strangely. I leave it to Bhavya now and let her start. Bhavya, go ahead. You can hear me, I hope.
Thank you, Anup. And I also want to thank WISCOMP and the panel organizers for this opportunity. I am joining today from the country of Paramadigal people of the Darug Nation, which is now so-called Australia. And I want to pay my respects to traditional owners, ancestral spirits, and elders past and present. I also want to acknowledge the ongoing loss of life and land in the form of genocide and wars that are going around us as we speak. It is challenging, and precisely why it's so much more important to remind ourselves of the hope and the possibilities that our own privileges accord us. So I just wanted to kind of begin with that. I will share a slide deck so that I can share some pictures and some of the insights with everyone. So let me know if you can. So it's a presentation that Ashutosh and I will sort of take turns to do because we have worked together in the field. I'm going to talk about this action research project that at least I had begun in 2013, so 13 years ago now, as part of the MPhil DevPrac first batch. And the immersion that I did was in this village called Imaligura in Odisha, India. The community that I have lived and worked with call themselves Kui Luko. Kui is the language they speak, and Luko is people. So Kui speaking people is how they recognize themselves. And I worked on the question that I'm going to sort of talk about a little bit more, which was around singleness and gender concerns, largely because I spent most of my time in the immersion living and just being around single women in the community. And in this particular community, there's like about 50-60% of the women are single. So that became the project, and that became the research area around which action was designed and in the way that we worked. One of the one of the things that kind of came up by exploring the issue of singleness, which was what I was doing. I was trying to learn more about it, women's experience, etc. It led to formation of Ekanari Sangathan, which we are all co-founders of, 40 women from Imaligura and I. And we basically became an organization, came together so that we could take up issues of singleness, work with other women, ensuring that more and more single women were like the issue of singleness was being foregrounded more, because it was not talked about, and especially from like a very gendered perspective of only why women were experiencing so much singleness. And as a theme, it was not just about oppression, which it is. It is quite systemic in the way singleness in Imaligura is, but it was also a lot to do with how women were negotiating being single on an everyday basis, and how it became also a source of empowerment, and what women were able to do because they were single. So we kind of looked at all of these nuances, and that led to this collective being formed. And as we kept engaging with these questions, and we also got pensions for women, so it was very focused on being a gendered collective. But there was also always this overarching concern around how do we sustain ourselves as a collective. And because all of these women are landless women, landless farmers, one way to go about sustaining the collective and the women in the collective was to engage in sustainable and collective farming, which I'll talk about in a minute. So to just quickly take you through the context, Raigada is the district where Imaligura is, and it's in Odisha, just along Bay of Bengal. And Odisha over the years has witnessed a lot of large-scale land dispossession, displacement, and ecological damage for a lot of reasons that are known to us. And it has specifically impacted the sacred relationship between land and Huiluko and other Adivasi communities in Odisha as well. This has also led to a lot of communities leaving their own knowledge practices and traditional ways of living behind because there's increasing loss of faith in their own practices over time. So this is the context where we are in. There's a lot of climate crisis, floods, recurring, droughts, and so we are trying to do agriculture in this context, which is heavily industrialized, and agriculture is heavily adopted by development organizations and market-based solutions, and on the side like mining, extraction, and a lot of climate change. So increasing industrial mining and capitalist based farming interventions in Orissa have led to a lot of ecological damage, climate precarity, and loss of connection to land and socioeconomic disparity. While Adivasi farmers are being encouraged by neoliberal forces to pursue individualized and cash crop farming for profit, single women farmers in Imaliguda are engaging in collective production and distribution of local food crops through reclaiming their connection to land, dharti, and reviving traditional agricultural methods and techniques. Is so that's the part that I will delve into a little bit more um, in the next half. So just want to check how I'm doing for time. Um, ENS is a space that evolved as a space for women's friendship and solidarity and shared survival, as I was saying. And a lot of how we function as a collective is based on how Kui Samaj, which is the local governing body of Kui Luko, is organized around. So a lot of ethical values about being a community, being a collective are basically translated from the community governing body itself. And the frameworks that I have largely used in understanding and doing this research is around post capitalist feminist politics and decolonial scholarship specifically. I will talk about Dharti and the relation to Dharti that these women have, and how it is part of our pedagogical and agricultural practices in a bit. But what I want to foreground before I hand over to Ashutosh is that agriculture for us is a site of climate action and climate adaptation practices, and what we learn and how the reciprocal and interdependent relationship with Dharti and land spirit, the Dharti Penu that we have learned a lot about, Ashutosh and I, from the women, is largely where we will place our conversation today. So I just invite Ashu to take over from here.
Yeah, good morning, everyone, and thank you, WISCOMP, for giving this opportunity to share my experience with working with Bhavya and ENS over a period of years. And I would like to start my introduction by saying that I became part of ENS in 2017 when the Agriculture Collective started working. And the first thing that happened to me was that I was asked to learn the language. I did not know the Oriya. Obviously, I didn't know Kui, which was the language of the people, but I also didn't know Oriya at that point of time. And the women of the collective took this initiative to teach me how to speak this language so that any kind of work could have been a possibility. Because and that gave me an understanding that any kind of learning, any kind of intervention, or any kind of grassroots work cannot start without learning the language of the people. And with that, this whole initiative started way before I joined Ekanari Sangathan at that point of time, because the collective had already been working along with Bhavya uh, from 2013, and by 2017 it organically came to an understanding that there is need of food. And I'm sorry, there will be this sound going on for time to time because my son is with me. So okay, so I want to just share that this was in 2017 when I joined Ekanadi Sangathan. We had a land at that point of time. Bhavya Anup sir and others, along with Ekanari Sangathan, had already leased a piece of land, and Bhavya might talk about a little bit more in the next session about this. But my role in the whole process was to learn and to discuss more about ecological agriculture. And the irony of the fact was that I started with an understanding that I knew what climate crisis was. I started with the view that what it meant for the women to to do this kind of work and how they should do organic agriculture. But with time, I understood that it was not ideological question. It was a practical, pragmatic situation for these women who were doing this agriculture with a very important realization that they needed to grow their own food. And that was one of the reasons that this climate question and the organic aspect of it took a long time for us to discuss, and a lot of dialogue went to and fro, through which we also learned what is the cultural value of agriculture and how it is important to understand that the knowledge system is with the community, that when we encounter the community, when we are in the community, does not cannot be taken on face value. One has to dig, one has to get into lots of dialogue to understand these spirits that Bhavya was talking about, Dharti Penu and Dharmu, who is the sun god, in order to understand the logic of the community's agriculture system. So it took a lot of time for me, and I also, I can say a little bit with confidence that for Bhavya as well, to understand what this agriculture meant to the women themselves, although there was already a consensus that we will be doing agriculture. So with this, I'll just end my part of introduction here, and we can move on to the other people, and we can take up other things later on in the conversation. Thank you.
Kriti, you can come in. Just one line I'm adding over here. Um, we had learned the world is divided into bourgeois and proletariat, but the women taught us a very, very different division: those who grow their own food and those who don't grow their own food. And I immediately looked at myself. I'm the one who doesn't grow his own food. So I think Ashu and Bhavya, we learned this also as we went along. Kriti also, I think. Yeah, Kriti, go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you, and I thank you, Bhavya and Ashutosh, for setting the platform, because I think all of us are engaging in similar contexts and facing similar issues, especially in Adivasi contexts where we're seeing this this moving away from the cultural practices. So I think my work is also dealing with that context, and I'll just start sharing. So, thank you for this opportunity to share this story today. I will share the story of a young women's group based in the central Indian state of Chhattisgarh. And I have been working closely with this group for the last 10 years now. And the group calls itself Hamar Chinhari. And Hamar Chinhari, Hamar means mine, and Chinhari means to leave footprints. So for everyone, this is the map of Chhattisgarh, and the yellow bit is Thamtari. That's where this work is based. And according to the 2011 census, 76% of the population in Chhattisgarh is in the rural areas, lives in the rural areas, and approximately 31% are Adivasi or indigenous people in the state. And Adivasis are increasingly losing faith in their cultural practices, which is also inclusive of the climate-sensitive cultivation practices that they have been engaging with. So this is the context of this work. So where did it all start? Like Anup said, this is the start of it. The genesis story is from the MPhil, my MPhil at Center for Development Practice at Ambedkar University, Delhi. And the course gave me this opportunity to stay and work in a small village called Mardapoti. And in the first 2 months, the women's group told me that, made it clear that there's a water problem in the village, or what they called Pani Ki Samasya. And a seemingly quick solution to this problem was devised as a infrastructural solution, which was a Nal Jal Yojana, or a water pipeline system. Now, on the one hand, we were making pleas to the government, but the government was not really managing to respond quickly to us because it takes a longer while for them. And on the other, we also saw that men in the village were quite unbothered by this water problem. And this kind of made us think that we need to take a step back and reassess what does water problem mean here. So PRA activity showed that women spent approximately 3 hours fetching water for domestic purposes. And the condition was probably going to get worse with construction of concrete washrooms for every household in the village. Now, this data and a few other discussions led the water problem to unfold itself as who fetches water. And we moved from Pani ke samasya to Pani lane ke samasya. The answer was largely women. Thus, the water problem in Mardapoti tended to become a gender question. And now, how were we to respond to this question? So, we created a youth group in Mardapoti who would talk about women's labor, because the public space was not somewhere women could talk about their labor or other struggles. The aim for this group was for women and men to know about each other's troubles, to kind of bring their separated lives closer. And interestingly, slowly, young men in the group became sensitive to the issue of unequal division of labor and started helping women in household chores. The youth group also self-scripted and performed a street play on the unequal division of labor in the village, but the play brought some awareness, and we realized that gender work needs longer and more sustained engagement. So by 2018, where we were was this collective of women. This youth group turned into a collective of women who started sharing about their stories with each other. And this space also kind of became a space where they started reconnecting with nature and culture. And in this process, there were a couple of activities that they undertook. One of them was vegetable cultivation. And this was kind of an intergenerational learning space for them, where these older women came to help them procure two lands in two villages. They taught them how to do agriculture. These women, these younger ones had started to think, how do we even sow a seed and will it come out or what will happen? But these older women were the ones who told them that let's do it. Let us teach you how to go about it. And from there, they went into doing lac cultivation to better the diversity in their local environment. And they also went into painting during COVID times, which was like their journey of cultural expression and acceptance of where we come from, what we belong to, and how we like to represent that. I think all these learnings was something that now they wanted to also pass on. And during COVID, they started teaching kids during lockdown to help schools. They started teaching the kids. And that's when I think something sparked in them. And through that process, by 2024, they decided that we wanted to open learning centers. And with much help from Aditi Mitra, who's an early childhood educator, they actually inaugurated two open learning centers in January 2025 in two villages. And in these spaces, what they were trying to do was connect with nature and culture through art and play. They were using folklores, rituals, festivals. They were reiterating these rituals. They were using a lot of help they are using a lot of help from the village elders. So this kind of everything that they had done, they are in a moment where they are now passing it on to the kids in the village. And I think I will end my presentation here and sharing that this was the story. And when earlier, when Professor Krishna Menon was saying that climate sensitive education brings us to questions like how we teach, how we relate to the environment, or how we even relate to each other, I think it rung a bell, because these are the questions that I've also seen Chinhari members brainstorming with Aditi Didi, with Anup, in regard to early childhood education. So I think thank you, WISCOMP, for this platform, for helping me to join these two strands and present in a way, and also take these ideas back to the girls. Yeah.
Thank you, Kriti. These are some of the paintings actually of the young women. When we were not, just one line, Kriti, over here, when we were not managing to meet in person during COVID, I don't know what happened. and they have never been trained to paint. They started painting, and there are so many actually now. And we suddenly found that painting was an important expression, not traditional education. So one was not good in an assignment, but one painted very well, actually. And in our schools, which are called Srijanshalas, we largely play and paint. Sometimes parents say, "Koi padhai likhai nahi ho raha hai." Neeraj, go ahead.
My presentation.
You have to put it up. Yeah, it will be
The
put up.
presentation.
It will be put up over there.
No, no.
Yeah, it's
On
come
कर
already.
देना.
Chal.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I thank you, WISCOMP, for this opportunity and really bringing me to share my work. I really thank Anup and all the other organizers. Yeah, my presentation is named as Ayangaraji, and their work is on indigenous women's Desi Kheti. And this work, I would say that owes its origin during my MPhil research course, and I completed my MPhil in development practice from the CDP during 2014 to 16, and following this, I worked closely with Adivasi communities in the Raidi block of Gumla district of Jharkhand. I will show that. Yeah, that is the project site. Project began in 2014. Is a Raidi block in the Gumla district of the state of Jharkhand in India. Gumla is roughly accessible from the Ranchi by 90 kilometers. So it was the Parsa Navatoli village in the Raidi block where I did my village immersion in 2014. Um, So the work was inspired from the Swaraj model, the Gram Swaraj model of Mahatma Gandhi, and I would focus on the what is the Swaraj and how it is related to the self-governance idea of tribal people. The concept of Swaraj literally means the self-rule. However, in Gandhian philosophy, it goes far beyond political independence from the colonial rule. Swaraj refers to the ability of individuals and communities to govern themselves, manage their resources responsibly, and make decisions that ensure collective well being. This was almost reflected in the tribal way of life, particularly when I merged with tribal people of Munda community in Parsa Navatoli village of Raidi block in Gumla district in 2014. In the context of tribal communities, Swaraj is deeply connected to the traditional ways of living that emphasize autonomy, community solidarity, and harmony with nature. Historically, many Adivasi societies have practiced decentralized governance systems based on customary laws and collective decision making. These systems regulate land use, forest management, agriculture, and social relations within the community. Up- I would like to mention that applying the idea of Swaraj to the development practice in the tribal context doesn't mean that these local existing structures to be removed. Instead, how these local systems of self governance can be strengthened. That was the idea of applying Swaraj to the idea of tribal self governance. It involves enabling communities to regain control over essential aspects of their livelihoods such as seeds, water, soil fertility, and food systems. When communities are able to manage these resources independently, they become less vulnerable to the market fluctuations, external inputs, and ecological degradation. I got this opportunity that how the tribal people can learn or means because there was a loss of indigenous knowledge, there was a loss of communality, solidarity. So that's uh, s- how to learn self-control over the resources. We got this opportunity in the form of when people in the village of Parsa Navatoli started facing water crisis for irrigation purposes. These efforts helped us to understand the idea of Sichai Swaraj, that how to control the water resources self-sustainably. When tribal people of Munda community, the Munda people were basically the dominant populations in the Parsa-Navatoli. They collectively labored to create a sandbag check dam in 2016 by their own resources. So that's how that was the first instance of the means to apply the idea of Swaraj and how the tribal self-governance can be restored back. The another idea, when I was doing research in the Parsa Navatoli with the community, then I found that the women, especially women farmers, were doing agriculture by using this desi seeds. The seeds you can see in the picture there. On the above is the paddy, then there is the respective rice. Gopal Bhog Dhan and its rice is called Gopal Bhog. These are the pictures, these are the examples. In the person of Atoli, I would say during my MPhil work, I got to know that tribal farmers in Munda families were using desi beej for rice cultivation like Jeera Fool, Java Fool, Kala Jeera, Son Pia, Kalamdani. And, to mention here again, I have brought these samples which are being displayed at the table outside. During my research during 2017 to 20, it became clear that many tribal farmers historically conserved and exchanged indigenous seed varieties suited to local climatic conditions and soils. These indigenous seeds are very suitably climatic controlled. These are drought resistant. Even some of these seeds can grow into full crop in the flooded water. These holds that much importance. These farmers use their local Adivasi knowledge to cultivate different rice varieties depending upon the lowland and the upland rice. But due to interventions of different government and non-government organizations, the spread of hybrid seeds as against these indigenous seeds, commercial agriculture and external market pressures has gradually weakened these traditional systems. Farmers increasingly became dependent on purchasing seeds every year, often losing access to locally adapted varieties. One of the most significant outcome of this initiative was the establishment of community seed bank, including desi beej of rice, mustard, and millets in 2019. The seed bank served as repositories of local biodiversity and ensured that farmers always have access to seeds suited to their agroecological conditions. They also strengthen collective responsibility as community members jointly manage the storage, distribution, and regeneration of seeds. Bij Swaraj seeks to reverse this dependency by revitalizing traditional and conservation practices. Means if you see that today when the green revolution and the genetically modified seeds are all around there and farmers has to buy seeds, fertilizers, everything from the market. 100% dependence is on the market as against, but these traditional seeds, they're even they are using the I would say the other thing is the means Khad Swaraj and the Khadya Swaraj. Khad Swaraj means they are also using their indigenous knowledge of organic manure to use these organic seeds to blown into a full blown crop. B Swaraj seeks to reverse this dependency. In the as I was doing research in the Parsa Navatoli and I was meeting the different women, um, this research went into the other villages like village of Valmanda, Bansdi, Sematoli, Loki, Bakaspur, Navagarh and Parsa Navatoli during 2018 and 19, where we worked, women played a central role in these processes. So V Swaraj helped farmers reclaiming their rights over seeds and protect the biodiversity that sustains their agriculture systems. This is one of the narrative from the one of the member of Ayangraji that from the Bansdi village, Kiran Bakhla compares the hybrid rice from the indigenous rice, where she says that Lalat, an improved variety of rice, is mostly cultivated by farmers, which gives them high production, but the same farmers accept that indigenous varieties of rice like Gopal Bhog are better in taste and nutrition. Even when leftover Gopal Bhog rice is kept overnight, soaked in water with salt, and is eaten with sweet tamarind pickle, which is called in the their language is bhotal bhat, an Adivasi dish. But hybrid rice means the rice that we are using in our today times. If you keep it overnight, it would get stale in the next morning. Yeah. The other means other these are the two Sichai Swaraj and the Beach Swaraj. These are the two objectives met, but the project was derailed due to the Corona crisis in 2020. Khad Swaraj and the larger objective of Khad Swaraj, that is sustainable food production for better health and society, could not be met. So these are the attributes of the how the means women in the Desi Kheti indigenous farming meeting. These Angani Mundine from the person I told you in the means the household where I lived and did village immersion. When I moved to the other villages, I met other women. Means the nearby village is the Vansdi, where I met Charya Rao. She is one of the co-founder, and she is one of the person who gave the name called Ayangaraji. I am with Kiran Bakla and Charya Rao. We were the part of a festival where we could showcase the different varieties and the forest food in a festival in the Gumla itself. Another person is Abba Shalina from the another village, Marda. These women were like the different beads of a garland which are waiting to be form a collective. Hemanti from the Bhalmanda, she's doing in a seed treatment process. Now this all led to the co-evolution of a term called Ayangraji. Ayangraji is a Kuruk word meaning Dharti Makaraj, that how the nature governs the resources and the people. This is the means Rangoli that they called is a symbolic prayer for the agricultural prosperity, good health, and well-being. That is one of the means principle of Ayangaraji collective. This is a Charya Rao who she narrates that each Rao Adivasi family make this tricolor rangoli before the onset of agriculture process by using powder of ranu, powder clay of earthen chula, and black color powder of burnt wood used in earthen chula, with some rice in center along with an egg and a small twig of velvet tree. This rangoli is symbolic prayer for agricultural prosperity, good health, and well-being for the coming agriculture season. That's what led to the Ayangaraji Women Association. These are the women. The last slide that uh, it's called the Rijrang. Rijrang is again a Kuluk word which is called as the you can eat, cook, and dance together. So Swarnima is there and Ashutosh is there. There we did this program on 13th of March 2020 in the RID. So that is my presentation.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Neeraj. Thank you very much. They have a secondary. Let's see if we get time. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll start with a small video of our work, and then I'll.
Carboni Living Private Limited is on a mission to revolutionize organic farming by providing high quality organic input solutions. We believe in sustainable agriculture, empowering farmers, and creating an ecosystem where nature, food culture, and farming thrive together. Through our partnerships and technical expertise, we are helping farmers transition to organic cultivation, ensuring healthier produce and a quality life. In the heart of India's farmlands, a silent revolution is taking place. A revolution that nurtures the soil, empowers farmers, and embraces the journey of food. Kikaboni Living Private Limited is more than just a company. It is a movement towards sustainable and organic agriculture. We provide high quality organic inputs, technical training, and sustainable solutions that transform organic waste into biofertilizers, making farming an eco-friendly, profitable practice. Through our partnership with the Lady Bamford Foundation, we have trained over 50 women farmers across 4 villages in Faridabad, enabling them to earn while cultivating organic vegetables. With just 2-3 hours of daily work, these women are making a difference, earning, growing, and thriving. Empowerment comes with knowledge. That's why 20 women farmers have been trained in creating their own vermicompost and biopesticides, ensuring self-reliance and sustainable growth. Our commitment extends beyond training. With partners like Yogita Biofarming, more than 250 farmers have benefited from our organic products, biofertilizers, biopesticides, and linkage with premium quality seeds, ensuring healthier harvests and chemical free farming. Knowledge is power, and through our collaboration with RAF, we have developed comprehensive training modules, training over 100 farmers in Gujarat on organic farming and vermicomposting. But our impact doesn't stop at rural farms. Through Ugao, we supply high quality vermicompost and cow manure to urban gardeners across Delhi NCR, ensuring sustainable green spaces in the city. Every waste is an opportunity. By working with development alternatives, we've enabled municipalities in Jhajjar and Nalgad to process 500 kilograms of organic waste daily, turning it into 300 kilograms of nutrient rich compost, closing the loop of sustainability. At Kikaboni Living Private Limited, we believe that the future of farming is organic, and the future of organic is now. Together, we are cultivating a greener tomorrow, one farm, one farmer, one family, and one harvest at a time.
So I thought that I'll just give a view of the work that we are doing. We started in the year 2020. That was at the peak of the COVID. So the conflict that I felt at that time was that this organic markets were emerging, and they were very elite markets, of course. And what troubled me at that time was that will it be a day will come when class will decide what food we are eating. Only the rich will have access to healthy food and the poor won't have it. That problem actually troubled me a lot. And then I thought that what is it that is missing here? And then this whole thing about the way of producing food, how we are producing it, where it is coming from, who is doing what, that became very important. Of course, it was already important from my own immersion in the field also, where we were where we were very closely looking at agriculture as a way of life over there. So, cut to the chase, in 2020, this conflict became very, very real. And then I decided that I have to work on the basic part of the total chain of food production, and which is the soil. And drawing from how Anup said uh, about having an earthworm's view, so let us look at how the earthworm would look at the soil right now. And it would say that पानी saline हो गया है, soil saline हो गया है, carbon content नहीं है, मिट्टी मर गया है मेरा habitat का, I cannot survive. The farmer's friend is dying. We can't see earthworms anywhere. And it is not just because of the fact that we are using chemicals. Chemicals is okay, but excessive use of chemicals, excessive use of pesticides, excessive use of weedicides, that is actually turning the whole ecology into a very, very precarious situation, the kind of climate disasters that we are talking about. And this is getting accumulated over a period of time. 30 years, 40 years, 50 years ke baad, we can see the effect of these things. In Faridabad, especially where we are working, we see that the incidence of lifestyle diseases have drastically increased. And if you trace it back, it is all related to the food that we consume. And then what do we have to question? That how that food is grown. And then we also have to question how about the basic food that we eat is grown. So all the grains, all the pulses, all the vegetables, that is a part of our, not the avocados of the world, but the basic things. So that we have to really question. And that is where then we understood that um, there is a lack of organic inputs itself. So first of all, there is no availability, then there is no accessibility, and then there is lack of technical know-how on organic farming also. We all know, as we rightly have heard, and there is a very beautiful line of this conference, indigenous epistemes. So, but what is this indigenous epistemes that we are talking about, and how does it get incentivized? What is the value when we talk about the farmers? Farmers को इस बात में value ही नहीं है कि गोबर खाद use करना है ना? Farmers will get value from the market for what? We don't have organic markets even now. We have something in Okla right now, but there is no incentive for growing organic product. There is no incentive for using organic inputs right now. See, I'll give you a very simple example. A farmer having 1 acre of land will use 1 bag of urea, which will come at about 300 to 450 rupees. Now, urea is also not available in this global geopolitics. Okay. So now they will have to, actually, whenever urea ka supply goes down, our vermicompost sales go high. This is what we have seen. So but then you look at the cost. So 1 bag of urea will cost them 300 to 400 rupees. But for 1 acre of organic farming, we have to use at least 2 tons of vermicompost, because the nitrogen component in the vermicompost is lower as compared to urea. So that renders it very, very not feasible for the farmer to use that practice. So in our work, we promote combination. We say that please do not go completely into organic, because the soil is not ready, the market is not ready, and you cannot take that hit. So those are some of the areas that we are working around. So in Faridabad and in Begusarai in Bihar, we have 2 setups where we are into large scale production of vermicompost and also cow manure. At the same time, we also develop linkages with the Krishi Vigyan Kendra, and then we do trainings with the farmers. So these are some of the works that we are doing. We are definitely trying to build the rhythm of life in our day-to-day activities, so that the agriculture is not just an income generating source alone, but it goes back to questioning the conscience, that how we are doing, how we are growing what we are growing. So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Let me give an opportunity to all. Bhavya, Ashu, Kriti. Neeraj has taken more than 5 minutes, so Neeraj comes last this time. And Shashi, quick responses if you have, because we should take some questions from the audience also, and also respond to the presentations I think Dr. Ruchira and Dr. Ranjana made. So anything that you want to add over here?
I mean, I'll just go first because I was thinking about what Shashi was saying, and we had a similar process and journey in terms of, at ENS in Odisha as well, that like I was saying, farmers were not convinced of their own practices. And when Ashutosh and I were more keen on doing ecologically sensitive farming, there was a lot of resistance that we faced in terms of, but what do you know about farming? And it is true, we do not. We just had this idea that we need to do sustainable farming. So there was a lot of experimentation that was part of the process. And in terms of, first elaborate discussions on why should we not do cotton, because it's a cash crop, and women were like, we will get more, value out of putting our labor. And then there were discussions around, okay, if you're not doing cotton, then what variety of rice are we going to do? Are we going to do high yielding varieties, or are we going to do traditional varieties? So there was a long discussion about that. Then from seeds and discussions on what kind of rice we were going to produce was to whether to use chemical fertilizers or not, because like Shashi was saying, again, the condition of soil is so bad because it's a cotton growing area and eucalyptus growing area. So there were a lot of these challenges that you can't just start with this vision of, oh, we'll just do organic farming or we'll do ecologically sensitive farming, because you need to do the work of repair first and engage in those conversations with communities where livelihood, sustenance, food security, all of these are also very, very important issues. And climate action happens in that sort of, connection and what we were saying. So we have learned a lot about, like Ashutosh and I, about Dharti and about that relationship and reciprocity after we did those experiments, because then we would see results. Then we would see that rice was growing in a certain way, and then suddenly we'll get a reflection from somebody that, oh, because we added a certain kind of manure that we are traditionally we have done is because this rice is happening in this way. So there are a lot of these stories that we have, these a lot of these experiences that have shifted our perspective and also community's perspective in trying to do things differently. Yeah, so I was just thinking about that a little bit.
Okay, so what I would like to add here is a very interesting thing that happened with these experiments, that we also started questioning along with all the women, and we were thinking about um, what constitutes as food. And we saw that mandia jao, which is a fermented millet gruel that people make in the village, is something that they consume all the time. And this was one thing that they would always take to the fields as well. And it's very interesting that uh, no one did more than 10 decimal of land in the current situation when we were working, like when I was there in the village. And uh, then there a discussion started that, okay, what sustains you for a longer period of time in a year? And people said that less amount of finger millets sustain them for a longer period of time, which was not true with rice. So it also asked us to ask this question that um, what do people mean when they say food, and how this idea of food is also constituted. And these discussions led us to lease another piece of land. So earlier rice was there was a land which was leased for rice, and now 2 acres of land was leased for doing finger millets. And many women in the collective, and even the people in the village, told us that it has been like when they were very small, and some of them were not even born, when these kind of finger millet being cultivated at such a large scale used to be done at that point of time. But now it was a unique thing for them. So my point is that it's not only the fertilizers, the soil, and other things, but we have to also look in very closely into what the community eats in their private spaces, because mandia jao is something that they do not share with everyone. There is a kind of a shame which is associated with such kind of food. And the reason for that is that it has, people might have, like, there were stories, and my current work also, in my current work I see that people say that people from outside do not like to consume this fermented finger millet. So I would further like to say that we have to also look into the food ways of people, along with land, soil, seeds, and other things, to understand. So it is a totality. Climate change and climate resilience are all matter of a totality of a life world that we have to look into, including cultural and cultural beliefs, to address it. So I would stop here. This is what I wanted to share.
Kriti, you want to add something?
I think just a quick thing that because Chinhari has started working with younger people and and they started teaching. I think what was I was thinking all of us are working on some way or the other, later or sooner, on the relationship with nature, some kind of revival of that. So I was just thinking while everybody was sharing their reflections, and I was thinking probably Chinhari uh, is now doing that with the children. That if perhaps I think their process is that if we reinstate that relationship, maybe the care will make them question that, okay, how can we reverse? Like Shashi said, that maybe a half and half model, let's start there, or let's give it a try. So I think that's where the young girls in Chanhari have been, and I actually also taken a lot from what is happening at ENS and Ayangraje, and I'm sure I will share Shashi's work with them, and they are going to take a lot from her also. So just that.
Anup, sorry. I just needed 30 seconds to just end with this quote that Tulsi Didi had shared, and about, I think it is a lot to do with pedagogy. And Shashi, I know taking from your time, but I just think the community voices matter. So I'll just quickly share that, what she said. And she says, what we get after farming on the land is ours. It does not matter how much we get. That is up to Dharti Penu, the land spirit who decides. It depends on the care we give to her. When we care for her, she takes care of us in return. We do not ask how much, we thank Dharti for what she has to offer. When we use chemicals for increasing production, we poison the land as well as ourselves. Our health and well-being are tied to the health and well-being of Dharti. When we think too much about how much, we tend to move towards death, death of the land, death of ourselves. But when we feel grateful for what we get from our land, we choose life. So I just wanted to sort of highlight that quote from Tulsi and yeah, end here. Thank you.
Thank you. You actually have helped Shashi. Go ahead, Shashi.
Just one thing, and I really made this a point when we were talking about education, environment education in the school, and when it relates to the Chinhari's work also, and so there is a very strong alienation from agriculture when we talk about urban school children. Okay, and because my daughter herself studies in a very convent school here in Faridabad, I meet her friends, and it's very strange that when they sometimes visit the farm, and when there is wheat, they say, "Acha, ye chawal ka wo hai kya?" So they are just not able to identify the crop. They are not able to identify the flower of the fruits. We are actually doing a picture book in which we are mentioning the flowers in agriculture, because when we talk about flower, we have already
Gulab.
only here gulab, jasmine, these things, but each and every food that is on our plate was a flower first. So that is the kind of work also that we can do with the children, and also in the environmental education, also in the IB board. The agriculture is becoming mandatory, is going to become mandatory. So that is an important work that we have to do.
You all have inspired me to share two lines. One, Bhavya, that term repair, and I think over the last 15 years, that's why I said they are my teachers. This term repair has become very fundamental for us. How do we repair the damaged planet, earth, soil, self? And how do we repair? Put a hyphen between re and pair. Repair elite and indigenous, repair urbanity and rural, repair agriculture, cultivation and industrialism, repair early childhood education and university. This was our last learning, Kriti, right? How do we repair university education, which looks very high and elite and theoretical, and early childhood education, which looks as if ordinary, actually easy to do. That's the most difficult to do, actually. So how do we repair, extent extremes, poles, that are poles apart, actually. So how do we repair? I think that word, Bhavya, repair, actually holds much of our work. Ashu's point and what you read out, Bhavya, what Neeraj shared with us is also important. Um, uh, we were divided between secular and religious. This experience took us to subaltern spirituality. We learned a third way. Um, um, and Meenakshi ma'am, I can share this with you. I rarely touch the feet of somebody. I touch the feet of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and it was subaltern spirituality actually that had transformed me. That I did not feel too rigid or rigorous, and I could really bend and submit and surrender and touch His feet. But I would not have touched His feet had I not gone through this experience, actually, of subaltern spirituality. How to learn from subaltern spirituality and give up our knowingness, our arrogant knowingness. How the women become our teachers, Bhavya, right? The one you read out. How she makes the most creative comment on climate than us. Neeraj, any last words?
Yeah, I just would like to make an analogy that I am working right now in Shahjahanpur, Uttar Pradesh, which has been the cornerstone of the Green Revolution. We tried to grow Kala Namak indigenous variety, which is on the table, and its paddy is black and the rice is white. And these and awareness level in the farmers in the Shahjahanpur is that much. When the crop was standing and it was black, the farmers thought that the paddy was rotten. They were not aware that paddy can be black in their knowledge system. So there is such a starking knowledge between the area that I worked in Jharkhand. It was easy to work there, but the area that where I'm working right now is means challenge is there. There is a challenge at every step. There is no seed, there is no means fertilizer. We are trying to grow vermicompost there. Is trying to understand the earthworm's worldview. That's what Anup said. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I think it's 12, exactly 12. We have ended on time. Thank you all. But please stay back. Don't go away. Bhavya, Kriti, and Ashu. Okay? Cha.
That was an extremely rich session, bringing together both critical reflections on pedagogy and profound experiences from the field. Thank you to all the speakers, Professor Dhar, Dr. Bhavya Chitranshi, Swarnima Kriti, Ashutosh Kumar, Neeraj Kapoor, and Shashi Shekha for sharing your work so generously. It was especially powerful to hear these diverse, community based resilient strategies and practices to counter the adverse effects of climate change. May I invite Professor Shyam Menon, Vice Chancellor of BML Munjal University, a distinguished scholar, practitioner in the field of higher education and institutional development, to share his reflections. May I invite Professor Shyam Menon, Vice Chancellor of BML Munjal University, a distinguished scholar, practitioner in the field of higher education and institutional development, to share his reflections.
Yeah, one major, thank you very much. First of all, thank you. Thank you. Actually, it was a very rewarding experience this morning. I think it's like having got the Padma Award for all of us collectively, because a lot of things which one conceptualized and put together, one didn't realize that these are the flowers which are going to bloom out of that. It's a very rewarding experience. Thank you very much. I mean, it's an interestingly, everybody talked about where the origins of these ideas, and then where they picked these things from, and where they came congregated in a program, but nobody mentioned the institution. It's a very interesting thing. You did? No. I mean, I was just thinking that I was actually taking that as a positive thing, because it's quite possible for people to think that they can kill ideas by demolishing institutions, but as Victor Hugo said in 19th century, 1852, I think, he said that you can resist an invading army, but you can never resist an invasion of ideas. When the time for ideas come, I think they would find its expression no matter where. So all of us, in a way, we spring from unexpected crevices in the earth, and then we thumb our nose to the system. Well, but something I picked up from this morning was actually, which cuts across most of the presentations today, was relationship. I think if I would say that what should be the crux of education, whether it be early childhood or university, I think it's this appreciation, a kind of spiritual appreciation of what this relationship we are part of. And I would urge you to sort of think in terms of our relationship with nature, not as one entity to another, but I mean, imagine, if I may use a metaphor, imagine the relationship between the
the colony of bacteria in our gut to the organism called human being, to the human society, to the larger nature, and to the planet and the beyond. That is the kind of relationship we are in. So I would certainly urge that we might want to sort of call this forum not Prithvi Darshan, but Prithvi Swadarshan or Prithvi Atma Darshan. Because who are we to see Prithvi? We are Prithvi. We are part of that. I think in that sense, this is the way in which the Prithvi has created a set of conditions in which there are these neurons which constitute this organism called Prithvi, in which all of us are. And we interact, engage, create ideas, and deepen those ideas, find practices for them. I think that is what Prithvi herself does. So, you are all familiar with James Lovelock's 1975-1979 work on Gaia. I think that spirit, if we can keep that in mind, that will be very useful, in my opinion, because that's in a way a shift of perspective. It's not. It's keeping ourselves, and we are not in the silent in the Silicon Valley thinking of a spaceship to escape from a decaying Earth. We are part of this place, and this is where we are. As Carl Sagan said, this is like a mote of dust caught in a sunbeam. That's what he said, and so poetically. But that's the fragility of this entire existence that we have. We are but a mote of dust caught in a sunbeam. Because imagine it's only 20 kilometers thick spherical shell. In this entire known universe, where a phenomenon called life exists. It's just a shell, a fragile shell of 20 kilometers depth. Earth, air, water, subterranean, all put together, it's just 20 kilometers. And that shell is all there is for in a phenomenon called life. We do not know anywhere else where this exists. So it's for us to think about how best to sort of experience that spiritual experience of being so special in this entire universe where we are part of this biosphere. I think that would be the crux of education, in my opinion. The connectedness that the students feel. You mentioned about they're not able to identify a grain or a flower or whatever. The connected that one should feel that when we switch on press a switch and then electricity, there is a lamp glows. The connectedness between that and somebody working in a colliery somewhere, and the various web of relationships that existed even in a small act of a small thing like switching on a light. So I do think that the education is taking us away from this connectedness. So I think restoring that central message of connectedness into education is what I think we should attempt to do. And as I said, when as they say, as Gramsci said, that the old world order is dying and then new is yet to be born, and these are times of monsters. Well, these are times of monsters, but these are all our times also. I think if there are monsters, then we should actually be there to fight the monsters, and that's what I think. That's the law of nature. I think that we have to find newer and newer equilibrium between this tension between these monsters and those of us, and I think that has to happen. And I would tend to think that if institutional expressions and institutional contexts are being methodically demolished, Um, uh, but ideas will still emerge through little spaces like this. And that's this informality of exploring these informal spaces, these intermolecular spaces, if I may put it that way, is what I think what we need to do. That may be through podcasts and small study groups, or little experiments happening everywhere, and all those little things, because we have to preserve this old spirit. That's very important. Just because institutions collapse, we can't. We have the responsibility of ensuring that the lamp still glows. There is storm outside, but then we shouldn't allow that storm to really extinguish this lamp. We have to preserve that, and that will be preserved in multiple locations, and in informal spaces, and in discussions, and experiments, and storytelling, and in various different ways. I think those, and we need to really ensure that there is a connectedness between them. There is connections between them, because we need to be encouraged by the sense that we are not alone. There are thousands and thousands of millions of others who think similarly like we do. We refuse to be pushed into the margin. This is our planet, and we shall see that. I think we and the planet, and we go beyond this, from this state of equilibrium to another state of equilibrium, where I think we should emerge, I'm sure, as the planet goes into her next stage of life. I think I'll stop here, because it's 5 minutes that you've given me. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Menon, for bringing the broader vision and purpose of today's discussion. I would now like to invite Dr. Meenakshi Gopinath, an eminent educationist.
Friends, Shyam, you've taken us to a cosmic, shall I say, state of potential consciousness. You talked about Carl Sagan, and you talked about interconnectedness, and you talked about, almost went to subatomic physics, and then you did Vedanta, and then of course Buddhism. So to really kind of bring us into the here and now, and yet connect us to the infinite. And I couldn't but remember the famous phrase Yatha Pinde Tatha Brahmande. As with the microcosm, so with the macrocosm. But to have that insight, to be able to see the connectedness of all sentient beings and the non-sentient world, is in itself a kind of pedagogy that reverses received disciplinary boundaries that we ourselves have framed. But in that process of inversion, what becomes to the knower, to the seeker, to what is sought, to what we are ostensibly investigating. Thank you so much. I mean, I'm truly at a loss of words after all of you have spoken. But what we had really was a cornucopia of ideas. And what really was most substantial about it is that it is coming not just from here, but from here. And the felt experience, the so-called transformative, experiential learning about what development means, what it should mean, and how it has come to be transmuted into something that is perhaps not development at all. So thank you so much for that. I couldn't but think of this Blakean phrase, and I think that's what was invoked by everybody here, all the presenters who did that, who walked us through such rich journeys to see the world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wildflower, to hold eternity in the palm of your hand and see infinity in an hour. I think that is what your program perhaps attempted to do. Am I right, Professor? So I'm just going to be a little episodic. I had a sort of a planned presentation, but it sounds so fake after what's happened. You know that WISCOMP is really in the field of women, peace, and security. And for several decades, peace, security especially, was seen as the space occupied by the rational, the masculinist, the sort of, shall I say, the clear linear tendencies that give our thought concreteness. And development was inhabited by women where the soft issues resided. Luckily, because of the work of people like Olaf Palme and the Brand Commission, which saw the whole North-South divide itself as spurious, and later, of course, the Limits to Growth Club of Rome report, and Mehboob Haq's work on human security, these two erstwhile discrete spheres began to come together to yield to us an understanding of human security where people matter, not just state and militaristic security. And I think, as Mahbubul Haq said, that what is security? It is a child that did not die, a disease that could not be prevented, a conflict that led to an armed conflagration, a dissident who was silenced, and so on and so forth. A job was that was not cut. So security is about dignity, about human beings. It's not about weapons. Unfortunately, what is peddled as security today is there for us to see in the theaters, the growing theaters of war and violence. And this is where I think women's voices engendering the discourse on security came in. Women entered with a different lens. They spoke in a different voice. They tried to insert themselves into the meta narratives of security, but knew that global realpolitics is not relationally defined at all, and therefore it doesn't in any way reflect their experience. And so there was an attempt to humanize security, and I think women played a huge role. We in WISCOMP try to imbibe, like your transformative program, try to somehow understand, or shall I say, assimilate that language, the language in some senses of non-hubris, and yet of both agency and voice. The language that is moving away from victimhood to discovering selfhood, and has selfhood as Ubuntu, because I am because you are, that kind of connection. So, and that was so much in evidence here today. And I really thank you, really thank you for giving us this cornucopia of ideas. And as I was listening to each one of the presentations, so rich, so authentic. I mean, as you said rightly, I think Sham, you've said this many times, and I'm dining out on your ideas, is that basically the purpose of all education, all knowledge, is to, in fact, go back to where we began and see it again for the first time. A learner's mind. A learner's mind always, one, not just of wonder, but having returned to where we began and to see it for the first time, as Eliot said. And in some senses, that it is a kind of self-discovery that is not solipsistic, that is not isolationist, that is, as I said, interbeing, interconnected. And what do we aspire through this process of pedagogy and learning is authenticity. And I think that was so much in evidence here today. We go to seminar after seminar and seminar with lots of rich ideas, but somewhere it just doesn't enter your being. But today's deliberations did, because it came from a space of authenticity. So I was just thinking back about, in the 60s, of course, many of you were not even a twinkle in your parents' eye at that time, but there was this amazing book that had come out called Blossoms in the Dust. Kusum, by a sociologist, then not a sociologist, Kusum Nair. And it really turned the way of seeing government on its head, and really talked about a different paradigm. Ethnographic narrative became a part of this. And since then, the whole development discourse in India has been struggling to find an identity, because she questioned the fundamentals of the way in which development was being done. And then, it reminded me of that beautiful couple of lines, I think it was from Gray, which said, "Full many a gem of purest ray serene, the dark unfathomed caves of ocean bare. Full many a flower is born to blush unseen and waste its sweetness on the desert air." And that's what we want to make visible. We want to make fragrant through this amazing immersive pedagogy of transformation. So my one question to all the practitioners here would have been, if I had had the time, how did you see yourself being transformed through this process? Professor spoke about it, And as a true philosopher, you spoke about it so eloquently. So that would be my research question, if at all there is one. How did I get transformed? And was I able to transform the spaces that I inhabited? If so, in which way? So, of course, Arindam spoke about the polycrises that we confront, and where the toxic fumes in Iran are just a metaphor of that polycrisis, where regional and global crises intersect and amplify them. And whether it's climate change, whether it's displacement, whether it's the undoing of the nuclear taboo, whether it is militarization, whether it is populist authoritarian leadership, how they mesh and merge and amplify the crisis, and hence called a polycrisis. But then, I was also thinking about how do we, somebody said, I think it was Krishna, how you live ecologically and how pedagogy must become more tactile. And that really spoke to me. In fact, it sung to me. And I was thinking back on when Kusum Nair broke the mold. She was actually inverting the metaphor of learning and pedagogy. And I think that process of inversion is what all of you, I think, are attempting to do through this program. Because after all, Socrates' chosen path was not to rid us or to tell us that or give us a map of the world that gave us a very comfortable path to understanding, where identities didn't matter and so on. His whole purpose in life was to shake us out of our thoughtlessness, of being mindful, not just in the moment, but also seeing. And as Foster said, only connect. Because when you raise a wall, you must realize what you're walling out and what you're walling in. So this is a great, great attempt. And I think Professor Dhar's challenging the instrumentalist and appropriationist methodologies that we use in knowledge production. And how can we bring a certain humility, you said that, to what we call the subject? Because after all, in the subatomic space of the cosmos, the object and subject disappear, right? The binaries, the so-called binaries. You become, you are not. So there are two things we need to understand in this day. Basically the etiology of violence. The etiology of violence, why it exists, how we continue to contribute to it unwittingly, how in some senses we are also part and parcel, as Professor Menon said, of this thing that we call Dharti, and how we can look at life affirming practices to bring the microcosm and the macrocosm somehow in sync, Gaia, as you had said. So then it occurred to me that I have to share this with you, that one person who inverted this, tried to in his life and his living, was a Baba Amte. And I want to bring two things together. There is a professor, there is a practitioner, a psychologist in Chicago called Gary Slutkin. And he was initially an epidemiologist. He had worked in South Africa on epidemics and so on and so forth. And then he came back to the United States to work after a lot of travel. And he was trying to understand the etiology of violence. And he came to the conclusion that violence is like an epidemic. It gets transmitted. You talked about intergenerational learning, but violence also gets, and there have been studies, as you know, Professor Dhar, study after study has reaffirmed this position. Now, when you look at this, he established a new organization called Cure Violence, and he was working on with the police who had actually been inured to nonviolent approaches, who had been steeped in violent responses to violent situations. And he did these various. So he was actually working within the framework of violence to counter violence. But here, I think what you're trying to do. So in Baba Amte's case, he inverted the notion of wellness. As you know, his ashram in Anandvan was an ashram where anybody afflicted with leprosy, which was then supposed to be an epidemic, and somebody who has leprosy should come nowhere near you, all right? And these were people, the so-called outcasts of society. So what did Baba Amte do? He called it Anandvan, the forest of happiness. he built it not very far, not very far out, somewhere in Maharashtra, and now his sons live there. I won't go into that. And he created this forest of joy. And what did he do? Every person who was rejected because he or she was afflicted by this so-called disease was welcomed with open arms and love. And no one was turned away from there. And if you ever visited there, you will be served food by people whose fingers have wasted away, whose toes are there, whose face have been discarded. But there is so much joy in the way in which they serve you. And you don't shirk away from it because it's all food that is cooked, that is, they grow everything on that farm. The only thing they import is salt. And there's another very interesting ritual because so he turned the idea of wellness, ability, agency on its head. That was, in some senses, interbeing, interconnected development practice. Anyone who passed away in that ashram was buried. They were not cremated, regardless of their religious background. And on the mound where they were buried were planted fruit trees. These fruit trees that were then sold to the markets of the so-called healthy society. And it was a very, 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 very powerful metaphor about how the bodies of the so-called diseased are really giving you nurture. In some senses, deep organic knowledge, but also a metaphor of turning things around its head. And so I also then discovered, I brought these notes, I won't inflict them on you, but one of the things, if you remember, one of the most poignant speeches is one that is attributed to Chief Siald, who was at the Treaty Commission giving, and he's what you call indigenous people of Canada and the United States, now not so United States of America, where he was giving away his land at the Treaty Commission, 1854, and whom we erroneously call Red Indians, but they were the indigenous people of the place that Christopher Columbus discovered. So he even as he was giving away this land where his ancestors lived and getting into an understanding about how this place would be developed by the so-called conquering white people, said the following, and I just want to leave you with this because I think I've got lots of notes from your talk. But he said, "How can you buy or sell the sky? The warmth of the land. The idea is strange to us. We do not own the freshness of the air. We will decide in our time. We do not own the freshness or the sparkle of water. How can you buy them from us? Every part of this earth is sacred to my people." I think Professor Dhar talked about subaltern spirituality. It's about the sacred in the ordinary. Somebody talked about the extraordinary in the ordinary and the ordinary, and I think it was the Dhar sisters. They were beautiful. It was a beautiful, beautiful, it was like a symphony, what you shared with us. Thank you so much. So finding the extraordinary, they were talking about the ordinariness and trying to differentiate it from the extraordinary. But I would suggest that we look at the extraordinary in the so-called ordinary, and we don't get caught or seduced, as you said, by this version of adaptation, where you show resilience by accommodating and normalizing what is violent, right? And we women face it all the time when we are told, oh, you can multitask. You can do everything, from looking after the children to getting a good professional life and doing everything and doing it with a smile, shopping, taking everybody to the doctor and all of that. So, and we fall for that because we are women, we can multitask. So similarly, I think what you said has great depth to it. So every part of this earth is sacred to my people. Every shining pine needle, every sandy shore, every mist in the dark woods, every humming insect is holy in the memory and experience of my people. We know that the white man does not understand our ways. One portion of the land is the same to him as the next. For he is a stranger who comes in the night and takes from the land whatever he needs. The earth is not his brother, but his enemy. And when he has conquered, this idea of conquering, of development, he moves on. The sap which courses through the trees carries the memories of the red man. Our dead never forget this beautiful earth, for it is the mother of the red man. Whatever befalls the earth befalls the sons and daughters of the earth. All things are connected, like the blood that unites one family. Man did not weave the thread of life. He is merely a strand in it. Whatever he does to the web, he does to himself. Where is the thicket? Gone. Where is the eagle? Gone. The end of living and the beginning of survival. So I think, in some senses, he talked about greed as integral to violence. He's talked about this rapacious instinct of man to conquer, to press down and not to pull up as agency. And so redefined the notion of power and conquest and development and wealth and rapacity and greed. And that is why when you talked about Swaraj, it was so, so important, because it's not just, it's just the various vows that the satyagrahis took before they entered the ashram. And one was, of course, about asteya, right? Asteya, non-stealing, aparigraha, non-accumulation, aswada, and all of these things. But above all, it was about samnyasa, holding something in trust, the idea of trusteeship, integral to his Swaraj. And of course, with that came fearlessness, ahimsa, and so on. So we are looking at an ahimsic orientation to the pedagogy of and not just ahimsa, but a different form of embracing the universe and its many, many manifestations, some violent, some not so pleasant, some good, but they're all a part of us, as that Shanti mantra tells you. It asks the waters to be calm, it asks the antariksh to be calm. But anyway, that is going in a different direction. So I just wanted to share just a few thoughts that came out of your presentation and presentations. You talked about the unpaid labor of nature. That was a beautiful phrase. I hadn't heard it before. And of course, the questioning about the citizen, the idea of citizenship itself. How do you reaffirm citizenship? How do you reclaim democracy? As Krishna has very often said, learning from the communities and not doing research on something, but researching with, not as an extension of oneself. Climate justice and imagining pedagogies, the epistemological rupture against enlightened way of thinking. I am because I think, and not I am not because I feel. And decolonizing Anthropocene. It's a big takeaway, and the whole idea of extraordinary in the ordinary, and the very adaptation to crises that normalizes these as something that is inevitable. But above all, you've talked about the ethics of care. And I think that's where women come in. That's where, whether they be frontline workers who are invisibilized during COVID. I'm sure many of you have seen this beautiful film called Homecoming. Is it Homebound? So it is also intersectional in many ways, cutting across all kinds of identities. So the idea of the climate refugee hotspot, 90 million people, climate refugees today in the world, and many of them have been pushed to arid places where survival itself is in question every day. WISCOMP did a very interesting study on this whole idea of, I think, Bangladesh, where the prawn farming was taken over by the big trawlers, and followed a particular a woman who was sort of displaced from her conventional livelihood. Then she went and she was then trafficked into Sonagachi. Then when she came, she completely lost her identity because she was neither Indian nor Bangladeshi. So this is how macro security can create micro insecurities. You may have also heard about the rape trees and the border of Mexico and the United States, where a lot of so-called illegal citizens, people on the run, people on the move, the nowhere people, try to come in for refuge. And lined over there near the immigration office and the immigration officials and their draconian stamping or non-stamping on their papers are the trees behind which systematic rape of these women take place. So that is insecurity in the name of national security. So there are many manifestations of this. We in WISCOMP tried to grapple with this, and I think today's has been a particularly insightful. It's almost been a meditative experience for us here. And I can't but acknowledge the presence in the absence of Pradhan that really for the first time taught us. I mean, they were the ones who actually began to talk about the Madagascar method of rice farming, where you don't necessarily need, it's not so water intensive. And I think Pradhan worked with Ambedkar in the initial years to set this whole process on place. And you spoke about the bird's eye view and the earthworm's eye view, and you spoke about mud on the body, mud. It's beautiful. But you know, there's something very interesting that's happened. Mud architecture, as you know, was where the IGNCA used to be. So we always used to, in the 60s and 70s, talk of Bharat and India as a synthetic version, and Bharat as where the heart of India spirit lies. Today, that metaphor has been inverted. Bharat has been colonized by commerce. Its temples have different lines. So when you talk about the citizens, we're talking about talking about a space which is meant primarily for the majority, those who follow the majority religion, who visit particular kinds of spaces of worship, right? If you think about it, what happens there? What kinds of exclusions happen there? You have a VIP line, you have a 3,000 rupee line, and then you have the ordinary citizen line who have to stand there forever. So what kind of Bharat is this? So Bharat itself has been reappropriated. I just wanted to share that. And thank you for bringing that. So I think I've gone on a little too long, but Bija, livable. The women have always been the peace builders and the seed keepers. They have also been the custodians of medicinal plants. Without them, we would not have Navdanya. We still have Navdanya, and that's so much an integral part. The other thing is about keeping the particular kind of rice in water overnight. Do you know that is now recommended as a cure for diabetes? It has the lowest glycemic index. And this is an old practice that people have adopted in their everyday lives. Gram Swaraj, Sinchai Swaraj, the art and aesthetics of development, the Madhubani art, the Gond art, and the Varli paintings. The difference between a Ritik Ghatak film and a kind of anesthetized Bollywood film where everybody wakes up in the morning with their makeup all intact and not a hair out of it, not a strand out of it. So anyway, vermicomposting, developmental alternatives, Ugao, so much to take. So from what we have is now a bountiful harvest of thought, of intention, of praxis, moving away from technique to a phronesis kind of idea of engaging with knowledge and knowledge production. And so from a barren space, we are going into a bountiful harvest. And I thank you, and it's such a privilege to partner, if I call it that, partner with the university, Munjal University, and of course GPAC. And I hope this can be an ongoing set of conversations here, right here. Thank you very much indeed to all of you. And I think Shreya has a better vote of thanks. Mine was a little all over the place. Please forgive me, and thank you for being so patient. I can imagine it. I began to see people shifting. I said, okay, now it's time. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gopinath, for such insightful reflections. We now open the floor for Q&A, and I request our speakers and presenters to join us here on the stage. And I warmly invite the scholars, practitioners, and students present here to please share your thoughts, reflections, or responses. Kindly keep your comments and questions brief, under a minute, and share who is it addressed to so that we can all listen to each other. Please share your thoughts, questions, responses, and kindly keep your comments and questions brief, under a minute, and share who is it addressed to.
A.K. Jain, I worked in the Ministry of Rural Development as eminent citizen, and I also wrote a book on sustainable rural development and agriculture. At the outset, the every talk was very transformative, experiential learning for me. And the top of the talk was given, of course, by Professor Shyam Menon and Meenakshi Gopinath, and it, I think, gave a kind of symphony that was inversion of lot of ideas, lot of concepts which we generally believe. My question is basically two things which are a little disturbing, and I don't have the answers. One is that why the organic produce is expensive, more expensive than the normal produce, and are we not committing some kind of mistake in the organic produce, organic agriculture, organic vegetables and fruits? The second contradiction is a big picture. We have about two-thirds of the population is rural in India out of 145 crores, and they are contributing to 70 to 75% of the GDP, and their income is also 70 to 75% of the total income. And rural, we have about 95 crore population, about two-thirds of the population, and their contribution to the GDP is only 18%. So this means very clearly, without any dispute, that the rural incomes per capita is one-fourth of the urban income. So what we are doing, and I think income is something which cannot be put under the carpet of this development, or we talk about climate change, we talk about so many things, sustainability, etc. So these are the two questions which I think should be pondered. I don't expect the answer right now, but should be taken up by the Prithvi and Darshan in future.
Thank you so much. First of all, what an elevating morning, and thank you to all the presenters. I'm just sharing a few thoughts. I don't know whether whether they translate into questions. I'm Anjali Bhatia. I teach in Lady Shri Ram College, by the way. That's my introduction. So, when we talk about, the issue here, I think, is climate pedagogy. I think that is one way to enter this conversation. And we talk about Anthropocene, and that's something that came up in your presentation. I mean, I'd like to hear your thoughts on the idea of the Anthropocene itself. Are we sort of placing too much of an onus on the anthropos? It is anthropocentric. I think that is one dimension which I thought did not come through in any of the presentations unless I sort of missed that bit out. And I'm saying this, because that has a bearing on what Professor Shyam Menon also later sort of said one of the most important takeaways is the relationship. So I'm thinking of, that how important, or I think it is important that in a climate pedagogy program, we do present a conception of nature that is not very passive. And I think that is something that I thought is lacking in the presentations. Of course, there's a lot going on there, because the stomach tells you that I'm hungry. I'm not hungry, and I'm also reminded of Investigations of a Dog by Kafka. So I think that whole relationship has to be posited in a different way if we want to see, this whole idea, this the revitalization or a vitalization of a future that is sustainable. There is a hubris, and I think there's in the idea of the Anthropocene at all. Thank you.
Hello everyone. First of all, I'm very grateful to attend this seminar and this conference, and it was really an interesting sessions to all the speakers. I would like to say, my question is to Ruchira ma'am first. That ma'am, you talked about the ethics of ordinary here. My simple question is that how does the ethics of ordinary lead our way or shape our way towards the sustainable futures? My second question is to Ranjana ma'am. Ma'am, when you talked about that one of the villages in, I believe, the Sundarbans area, where teachers focus more on syllabus rather focusing on talking about Sundarbans and how ecologically important that area is. So my simple question is that how do we feel that awareness can be brought in that areas, and how can the people be taught the same when the teachers are itself themselves not interested in that topic to be covered upon? My third question is to Neeraj sir. Sir, you talked about the Sichai Swaraj, etc. Can you please shed some more light that how is it helping us to bring the sustainable futures here? Thank you so much.
Let's invite the speakers to respond now.
To your question on the anthropos, see, when I was presenting on this, the idea was that my main contention for anthropos is that it is somewhere, it's very universalizing. This is something that I said, it's very homogenizing, it's very universalizing in nature. And humans are being when we say that humans are responsible for the climate trauma or climate distress, so I have I had a contention on that, because who are these humans? What the idea is to the idea is to mention that it is not the humans per se, but the dominant structures, the hegemonic regimes that are responsible for these for these distress. And what these regimes miss out, or rather don't speak to, are the subjective struggles, the layered anxieties of different kinds of people. We have the subalterns, particularly I would talk for the margins, the subalterns, whose voices are nowhere. And I think in all the talks and discussions, this is something that we were talking about, that where are the subalterns, from where, because they are the ones closest to the nature, closest to the environment, and their knowledges are nowhere. So when I was talking about the whole, when I was critiquing anthropos, the idea was not to outrightly dismiss the discourse, but the fact that these regimes and structures are not speaking to the subalterns, not speaking to the people, their subjective realities, their ordinary, something that I drew upon Veena Das to talk about it. So yeah, that's one thing. About your question on ethics, so see, this is something that I also said, that ethics is nothing but the damage and the rebuilding going together. Ethics is nothing but the despair and the repair going together, something that Professor Dhar and all the researchers have also, in their studies, and we got a insight on how damage and despair is happening hand in hand. Where there is damage, there is rebuilding. Where there is despair, there is repairing that is happening. So there is a lot of hope that we see in all of these ethnographic, all of these field works. And I think that is sustainability. Something that you are saying, that what can lead to sustainability. But I think that's already happening. Transformative climate actions are already on the ground. It's just that we need to acknowledge that, we need to affirm that, we need to understand and bring it part of our formal climate knowledge or climate pedagogies. That would be my answer. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your question.
It's okay. I'll come in later.
Yeah, as I said in my presentation already, that though I am working right now in the Shahjahanpur, and earlier I was working in Jharkhand, there is also already the struggle going on between use of hybrid seeds and the use of indigenous seeds. While using hybrid seeds, chemical fertilizers, it's bringing the land to the barren. Using the fertilizer for growing the food, so many diseases are growing up, and we are all infested with so many diseases. Research says that India is the diabetic capital because of the food that we are growing. As against to this knowledge of green revolution, the use of indigenous resources, the use of the local knowledge, the use of vermicompost, while creating the sustainable food will not only bring the means diseases down, will all these knowledge and resources and the sustainable food production is climate friendly, is human friendly, is also means whatever in total this resources and this kind of a knowledge production is creating a sustainable future.
Yeah, I would sort of connect 2, 3 issues together, and then, of course, I'll come back to Aditi's question, who's my student from Ramjas College, a very young student from second year, and very enthusiastic too. So I would begin my response in the context of what Dr. Gopinath sort of asked all the presenters, and also through a question to everybody here, that whether the experience was transformative. I think the experience was very transformative. And I think as researchers, whenever we go to a field, any field experience is transformative. And this research work, turned out to be very close to both of us. Because we kind of collaborated for the first time, and this was certainly not a domain of our specialization, but the fields that we chose, although we are both from West Bengal, but Sundarbans is not an area that we visited in that way, that we sort of covered. And Gadchiroli is also something that, we've never visited. Delhi, of course, we are staying. So in terms of bringing these three terrains through because our focus was, takeaway was ethnographic, research work. It was certainly very, very transformative, indeed very transformative in nature. And connecting to that, which, ma'am from Lady Shriram College, asked, I think here the entire attempt is to establish the relationship with nature that, most of us are being talking about. That relationship, is there. Either it is unacknowledged or it's being ruptured. So we have to get back to that, because nature is something that either we are getting increasingly disconnected with, industrialization and development taking over, or with some sections it is deeply part of their life, but with increased urbanization and development, that we are getting distanced from there. So this entire study, in some way, although it still remains a very initial study, is to go back to nature and to sort of experience that relationship, at least in both these places like Sundarbans and Gadchiroli, and bring out those discourses. And connecting that to what Aditi asked, of course, that is something that needs to be talked about and brought, because, when the margins are not being represented, and it is there, not just in this context, but in various contexts. I'm somebody from the history background, and this is a question that I constantly face, in my class in Delhi University, where students are from various parts of the country, that, what about our history? And this is a very mainstream syllabus that we are sort of going through. What about our space in the in the curriculum, in the syllabus that we are doing, when we are not represented at all? But I think, taking from there, the fact that those questions are asked, the fact that those interventions are made, the fact that people are speaking, especially when we are going to them, therefore it is also a learning experience for us as academics, and also for those making policies, that until and unless, if you really want to work on the realm of, for example, climate education, you will really have to go to the grassroots, and you will have to go to multiple levels of at multiple levels and diverse areas of the country, to understand how effectively it can actually work, if I may, sort of talk about in this context. So it has to be flexible, it has to be inclusive, it has to be multi-level. Until and unless we have that conversation, I think, this possibility of sort of initiating a process of climate education, which I think is really necessary, given our times, and the fact that, climate change is impacting all parts of the globe and at every level, otherwise it will not make, any sense. So, yeah. I'll just quickly add, Professor Dhar, you wanted to say something?
No, please go ahead.
Just quickly add to Ranjana. the main concern is that because eventually if you're talking about climate pedagogies, I think all the researchers, what is important is that how do we bring these researchers into the formal curriculum, bring these knowledges into the curriculum or into the textbook or majorly into the transactions. Because this is something what I said also, that in the transactions what happens is that it is the teacher's knowledge that is considered to be the legitimate knowledge. So even if I from a Adivasi community, or I from a Dalit community, or from a particular religious community, come with certain kind of rich knowledges that I can that I can talk, share, but it never, that voice never gets a platform. So something that I said, that even for when this question was asked, and this is something I witnessed myself, that when this question was asked by the teacher, that how can indigenous traditions mitigate climate change, and the way the teacher was articulating the knowledge in the class from the text, it actually left the Adivasi students felt as if they are absolutely not aware about their own lived experiences. So I think that is also something we need to really work on. How do we do that? We have to think about it. But I feel that that is something which is very important, and that is something I see in the schools, that even if the curriculums are sensitive, even if the textbook is sensitive, but it somewhere does not get articulated in the class. So I think we all need to think that how do we bring all of these important knowledges into the classrooms. That's it. Thank you.
I think let all five respond to Dr. Gopinath's question, Meenakshi ma'am's question, how did it self-transform you? Because we are not getting into the nitty-gritties of theory anymore. Let us give a sense of that. So Bhavya, Ashu, Kriti, and Shashi and Neeraj. And
Yeah, you have 1 minute, so
yeah,
please.
maybe we
feel
can
free to
end with that. Yeah.
I mean, it's such a loaded question to answer, and the answer is that uh, it's. I mean, I don't know what to say, but other than it's been like I was saying, 13 years of just being in this space and doing this work, and everything that I am, and I remember when Professor Gopinath was talking. She was talking about just becoming. I'm not this or that. I just become. I think that's my response. That every little thing to every big thing that happens in relation to the community that I work with is a process of self transformation. And it's not just the academic side of things or degree or the knowledge that I think we have attained. I think I can say for the Def Prac gang this that we've often shared how it's about who we are as people and who we are becoming as people, because the apart from knowing about agriculture, apart from learning about indigenous epistemologies and blah blah blah, it's about how we exist in these relationships and constantly question our own perspectives and knowledge that we came to the field with. So it's a lot of learning process and changing process, and like learning when to stop talking, or these small little things. When you do group work, you learn with women and how to handle conflict, how to sort of be in relationships where things are not just all hunky-dory all the time, but through these over a decade year of these associations, what is the power exchange, how do you make decisions with 40 women in a group. All of these have been very significant to also our own personal lives, I think. So that would be my broad response, but I think it needs a book entire book on what is self-transformation in this process.
Interestingly, building on what Bhavya said, I was about to tell Anup that Anup, we should write. All of us should come together and write a book on that. And also, I think it's coming from, I've recently written a paper and the reviewer asked me, but what is your self-transformation? And I had to put it out like point by point. And taking it from Bhavya, because Bhavya said most of the things. I think one thing I really thought was the first thing perhaps that changed me was moving from individual to collective. The kind of spaces and the kind of knowledge systems you've grown in is more individualistic. It's more you success, you succeed, you have to do well, you have to do this. But moving to what, like Bhavya said, when to stop talking, when to give space, all of those things, how to uh, function and how to be in a group with other people was one of the many transformations that I had. Yeah, and I think another was also to learn. I think yeah, another was to also to learn to be, which is part of learn to be in a community, but learn to be in the village, learn to be less scared of human beings than of animals, because they would always tell me तुम 10 बजे के पहले घर नहीं आती हो, कोई गाय आके मार देगी. They never said कोई आदमी आके कुछ कर देगा, but they said अरे be aware of animals or be aware of these around you. So I think there's a worldview shift altogether, but these would be just one or two things that are coming off uh, of my mind at the moment. Yeah.
Ashu, you need more time?
No, I'll share one point because I think Bhavya and Swarnima has almost covered everything. I would just like to focus on one thing that I learned in the village was that how they teach you, how they hold your hand, and how they understand that you don't know. Most of the time, they know that you don't know, and then they teach you their ways. It's up to us. And my self transformation, perhaps, if I can claim that to be, is that I have learned how to listen to people, and when they ask me to stop and listen, and they perhaps they will not be very vocal about it, but they will show signs of it, and I have to recognize those signs, and perhaps I try sometimes fail as well in doing that. So that is the only addition that I have in what both of them said. Thank you.
As Adas said, it's really a tough and a highly loaded question. And for me, it has been even a very painful experience, I would say, that as immersion was the very part of the MPhil course. And when I was put into the village in 2014, in January, and when I'm saying it, my blood is chilling inside me. Yeah. I would say that immersion has means scarred myself from inside out. When I was in the village, and I was just for the 4 or 5 hours I was roaming in the village, and I would go in a bit of detail. Sorry, and I was roaming in the village, and I was seeing. I saw such an economic poverty for the first time in the village, and that experience was very painful to me, that how people can survive in those conditions with those resources. I came to the village from Jindal University, where I enjoyed everything. So I started comparing that experience with myself. I for 4 or 5 hours roaming in the village, I called Anup. Anup, it is being very tough for me. I don't know whether I would survive in the village. Even I would survive a day in the village or not. I don't know. That Anup said, try to be there and try to meet the people, and I could not survive. On the very day I left the village in 2014 January, I went to the block office. All Ashutosh and others came to me. They tried to console me. Even means I went up to that mind that I left the course in a week. Went to the home, and prepared for 3 months for myself, that I had to do this course. But I would not go to that village. That village haunts me. Even today, after 7 years, I did not go to that village where I was faced for the first time. Next time in the Raidi, I successfully did my immersion. I learned to means what is soil, what is seed, what is knowledge from these women only. The very important thing that they used to say about themselves, that we are Angutha Pass. We are that much illiterate. We are Angutha Pass. That was, and they used to say that with pride. But their knowledge, the world of the third, that what we are taught, the knowledge of the third, the knowledge of these people is that much important, that need to be part of the not, I would say, that climate education, that to be the part of the curriculum of the education in the urban schools, that how the people can survive in those resources, how the people live, how these women do the agriculture. So that I was the new Neeraj after MPhil course, I would say.
Neeraj actually left the course. He's Ashu's classmate, but became Shashi's classmate later. He did the course between batch 2 and batch 3. He's 2.5 in that middle, actually. Yeah. But really, a transformed Neeraj made a comeback after that very traumatic first experience of immersion. Actually.
Immersion is not an easy task, I would say.
Yeah. Shashi.
Yeah, so he said painful tha, mere liye to pain alleviating tha, because I found three things, and all of my other colleagues have already shared. But the first thing that I felt was that I found a language to express the internal disturbances that I was feeling and which I was not able to make the meaning out of. This space gave me that language, so communication. Then it gave me a lot of courage to question so many things in and around me, which I don't think would have been possible if I did not come to the course. And thirdly, it gave me a tribe, a community where actually I belong, I feel. So these are the three crucial things that and I would also want to respond to you, sir. Organic. Okay, sir, organic खाना खाए हैं कभी? हाँ, तो उसका स्वाद कुछ अलग लगता है. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is that it is not a fad. Let us please understand that it is a reality that our soils have died. Carbon content, there is a research which tells us कि carbon content कैसे increasingly decrease होता जा रहा है soil में, which is actually impacting not only the soil and not only the food that we are growing and eating, but also the water, the air, everything else that we are connected with. Soil is actually not just a medium. It is actually in rotation, medium and means and everything. We are all soil. So organic systems and organic way is very important. However, the important question is that how we are trying to commercialize it. How are we then ending up making it also an industry? So that is something which we need to question. The other thing is that if we want organic systems to survive, there are other systems also that have to be altered and modified, and especially market, for example, especially grower and consumer relationship, for example. So these are some of the thoughts that I had.
I'm not sharing mine.
Thank you for responding to all the questions, and thank you for your thoughtful questions and participation. We invite you to continue these conversations informally over lunch. As we come to the close of today's symposium, we take back with us a set of rich and diverse reflections. The conversations have brought together perspectives from academia, grassroots practice, and lived experiences, offering us more grounded and inclusive ways of thinking about climate change. At WISCOMP, we see this symposium as part of an ongoing effort to create spaces for dialogue and learning. We hope to carry forward these insights and continue engaging with these ideas across platforms and conversations in the future. We extend our sincere gratitude to all our speakers and presenters, Professor Arindam Banerjee, Dr. Ruchira Das, Dr. Ranjana Das, Professor Dhar, and to all the presenters, Dr. Bhavya Chitranshi, Swarnima Kriti, Ashutosh Kumar, Neeraj Kapoor, and Shashi Shekha, for sharing their time and insights with us today. We are deeply grateful to our partners, Professor Shyam Menon and the BML Munjal team, the Global Partnership for the Prevention of Armed Conflict, Shubhra ma'am and the Programs and Tech team at the India International Center, as well as Syncline, for ensuring the smooth conduct of today's discussions. We also acknowledge the contribution of Mr. Rajiv Mehrotra, Managing Trustee, Secretary of the Foundation for Universal Responsibility, of which WISCOMP is an initiative. A special thanks to Dr. Gopinath for her vision and to Professor Krishna Menon for her guidance and invaluable insights. Finally, we thank all of you for being a part of this dialogue and for contributing so meaningfully to the discussions. Thank you all for joining us, and we now invite you to join us for lunch. Thank you.